Hello, dear history lovers. Tonight, I will be telling you the legend of Arthur. But first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video so I can share my upcoming videos with you more quickly. Now then, sweet dreams in advance. In the year 410, the eagles of Rome withdraw from Britannia. Their bronze wings showcase one final gleam in the pale northern sun before disappearing on the horizon like a dream at dawn. They leave behind a land caught between worlds, neither fully Roman nor yet English. That territory hangs suspended in a perilous twilight, a place where legends are forged and life springs anew from the ashes of empires. The Christian mosaics in the quiet stone villas gather dust, while weeds break through the marble floors that once hosted feasts where Latin verses flowed like wine. Across Britain, such scenes of desolation become commonplace. This land, no longer protected by the borders of Roman legions or maintained by the bureaucracy of the collapsing empire, recounts over and over again the story of a civilization's end after nearly 400 years of existence. The island is fractured into numerous kingdoms, great and small, ruled by men who still remember Roman law but no longer possess its power. Yet, Tintagel on the wild coast of Cornwall is a meeting point where Mediterranean pottery is intertwined with local Celtic artifacts. The one who governs this wind-battered stronghold continues to manage the ancient trade routes that stretch from Ireland to Constantinople. Cadbury Castle in Somerset, a major hill fort, bears the traces of robust 5th century fortifications. In that era, someone with significant resources was preparing for a war woven of stone and earth. The Saxon tide, having made landfall on the shores of Kent and Sussex, was now advancing relentlessly westward. These were not merely raiders seeking quick plunder. They were communities crossing the long whale road with their women, children, livestock, and even their household gods, intending to establish a permanent life on British soil. They carried with them a harsh language, strange customs, and a warrior culture that valued honor, loyalty, and the craft of war above all else. Gildas, a British monk writing in the 6th century, offers terrifying descriptions of this Saxon advance. In his words, we feel the agony of a man watching his own world burn. The fire of vengeance spread across the entire country, reaching westward and covering everything like a crimson curtain all the way to the ocean.
In Gildas's words, the destruction wrought by Saxon axes echoes the shattering of Romano-British skulls, or the ransacking of libraries where the verses of Virgil had resonated for generations. But Gildas speaks not only of losses, he also touches upon moments of victory, recounting how the invaders were driven back as the British resistance took shape. At the head of this resistance stood Ambrosius Aurelianus, known as the last of the Romans, who succeeded in rallying the scattered kingdoms and reviving hope in desperate times. Ambrosius would, in later centuries, be referred to as a forerunner to the Arthurian legend, or, in some accounts, his kinsman. He served as a bridge connecting Roman order with Celtic heroism. The narratives compiled generations later in the Welsh monasteries of Cambria have preserved concise details, shining like bright rays of light piercing through the mist of legends. Among the records from the year 516, the terse words of a writer state that Arthur carried the cross of Jesus Christ for 3 days and 3 nights, and that the Britons stood with the victors at the Battle of Badon. These words, inscribed on parchment in a monastic cell, constitute the oldest written evidence for Arthur's existence as a historical figure. However, the profile drawn here is not that of a king, but a commander who achieved the greatest victory against pagan enemies through Christian symbols. The duration of 3 days and 3 nights suggests a prolonged siege or a sequence of interconnected battles, which was characteristic of the British resistance of the time. The Historia Britonum, attributed to the Welsh monk Nennius, details this narrative further. It provides accounts of Arthur fighting 12 battles against the Saxons, culminating at Mount Badon, where he slew 960 men in a single charge. While these numbers carry a legendary air, the underlying fictional realism of the narrative is striking.
The forces under Arthur's command managed to halt the Saxon advance for a generation and secured a decisive victory. This triumph allowed certain historical figures who would inspire the legends that shaped medieval Europe to emerge from the shadows. One such figure is Lucius Artorius Castus, a Roman cavalry commander who led campaigns into Scotland in the 2nd century. However, this figure is too early for the legendary king. Lucius's name and military achievements may have been passed down through oral tradition, representing armies that utilized heavy cavalry tactics. Armored horsemen wielding long spears paved the way for the Arthurian mythology, giving form to the romanticism of medieval chivalric warfare. The titles Great King or High King, mentioned in continental sources, further strengthen this connection. On another note, records exist of a British commander who crossed into Gaul between 400 and 470 AD to fight alongside the Romans against barbarian invasions, before retreating into the forests of Burgundy. This historical figure's royal title, mysterious end, and the events unfolding in foreign lands bear remarkable similarities to the later Arthurian legends. Yet, among the figures recorded in the earliest sources, the name Ambrosius Aurelianus stands out. Gildas describes him as a noble Roman leader, depicted in purple attire, which suggests imperial ties. Ambrosius is credited with organizing the British resistance against the overwhelming Saxon superiority, and some sources imply that Arthur was seen as his successor. There is a general consensus that the victory at Mount Badon was the climax of the resistance spearheaded by Ambrosius. This battle is said to have changed the course of European history. For the Saxons, confident in their histories that they would completely conquer Britain, and emboldened by their previous easy victories, were advancing without fear. This victory, however, upended all those expectations.
At a time when other parts of the Roman Empire were caught in a process of collapse, an event was about to occur that would sustain its impact for 2 generations. The stage for this battle may have been Liddington Hill in Wiltshire, with its commanding view over the Thames Valley. Ostensibly, the signs of this conflict may even extend to the mysterious crop rings in Dorset. Ancient defensive structures featured a strategic design that could channel enemies into deadly areas while still performing their protective duties. However, with the onset of the Saxon invasions, the strategic importance of the location gave way to the crucial outcome of the struggle. The British resistance achieved a definitive victory against their seemingly invincible enemies. Records from the period indicate the battle lasted 3 days, suggesting either a long siege or a combination of several powerful engagements. Archaeological research reveals that the Romano-British forces adapted their tactics to the prevailing conditions of the time. The rigid infantry formations of classical Rome were abandoned, and more flexible cavalry units, supported by local militias, were brought to the forefront. Heavy cavalry, equipped with long spears, could provide significant advantages with the presence of competent leaders capable of coordinating such precise tactical operations. A supreme war leader arose in this environment, the Dux Bellorum, or leader of battles. This leader cemented his authority not through nobility or lineage, but through military successes and victories. The warriors loyal to him were a mixed assembly of Romano-British cavalry, Celtic soldiers seeking fame, Christian fighters believing in a holy struggle against the Saxon pagans, and mercenaries drawn by the allure of triumph.
Developments following the Battle of Badon demonstrate that this success had significant consequences, not only militarily, but also politically. The Saxons not only retreated from the forward outposts they had seized, but also completely abandoned plans for new conquests, instead consolidating their dominance in existing regions and giving up their expansionist ambitions. Historical evidence suggests a relative peace prevailed between the Britons and the Saxons for about 50 years after Badon. The stories covering this period are interpreted as the Arthurian Age, representing one of the last successful defenses of Romano-British civilization against barbarian invasions. Simultaneously, these victories provided a great opportunity for Christian culture to strengthen its roots. While Christian chroniclers later recorded these achievements, long before, Celtic storytellers were weaving epics in the misty atmosphere of Gaelic culture, centered on figures who transcended mortality. The legendary war leader, far from being a historical king of yesteryear, emerges as a supernatural hero who leaves his mark on the world through his adventures. The tale of Culhwch and Olwen, preserved in medieval Welsh manuscripts and originating from much older oral narratives, includes the story of a figure who commands not only warriors but also giants, shapeshifters, and magical creatures. In his palace reside men who can hear voices from 80 kilometers away, dry up the seas, or grow tall enough for their heads to brush the clouds. This depiction points to a hero from the wonderland of Celtic tales, more akin to the Irish Finn McCool than a specific historical leader. Yet, within these extraordinary stories, elements endure that will echo through all subsequent retellings of the legend.
The Hall of Heroes humbly welcomes all distinguished warriors, regardless of origin. The justice served here, protecting the weak and the innocent, elevates this figure into one of the Celtic world's most cherished patrons. The values of hospitality, generosity, and justice form the moral building blocks that will eventually underpin the detailed concept of chivalry in medieval romance. The Welsh character holds darker connotations that Christianity, despite all its efforts, could not fully obscure. In the raid on Erin's otherworld's fortress to steal a magical cauldron that would never empty, the hero loses almost all of his companions save for 7. This event becomes a harbinger of the tragic conclusion of the quest for the Holy Grail and the disasters marking the dramatic close of the legends. The hero battles giants and monsters representing chaos, beings older than human memory, wielding a sword named the Colored Forge, as rendered in the Welsh name, a legendary weapon that will later be known as Excalibur. The Celtic tradition encompasses a memory that extends beyond the shores of Britain. Breton refugees fleeing during the Saxon invasion carried the stories of the great king to continental Europe. These narratives merged with French romance, creating a powerful transformation that influenced the foundations of European literature.
The figure of Arthur le Grand is brought to life, a man of great renown whose name is revered from Ireland to Jerusalem. Despite being pressured by Roman law and Christian doctrine, the Druids maintained an underground culture that shaped the Celtic people's understanding of kingship and heroism. This concept of the sacred king, where the monarch's spiritual health was believed to affect the land's fertility, infused the Arthurian legend with mystic elements that even Christian interpretations could not completely eradicate. Lands that turned barren due to the absence of the rightful ruler served as a metaphor for royal failure. The magical sword choosing the rightful sovereign stems from pre-Christian Celtic beliefs, reflecting the deep mystical bond between the king and the kingdom. Celtic mythology also contributed significantly to the idea of the hero's tragic fate in both Irish and Welsh traditions. The greatest warriors were marked by doom from the moment of their birth. Their very excellence prepared their inevitable end. Cuchulainn's battle fury made him invincible, but also isolated him from human society. Theona's excellence as the flawless leader of a warrior band simultaneously harbored the seeds of her own downfall. The Arthurian legend would inherit this tragic cycle, transforming a historical victory into an endless loop of rise, glory, and inevitable collapse. The transition from history to legend happens almost instantaneously. Welsh bards, accustomed to portraying their patrons' victories, shaping reality like wrought gold found in the English war chief, had found a perfect subject worthy of celebration. The victory against the Saxons became a symbol of British freedom, a triumph defended against all their enemies.
The legendary cavalry charge at the Battle of Badon was transformed into a mythical assault, overcoming hundreds with supernatural ease. Military leadership symbolized the dream of a perfect kingdom, unifying the fragmented British principalities under a single crown. The geographical distribution of early Arthurian settlements revealed historical anchors stretching from Cornwall to Scotland. While ancient monuments were associated with the Arthurian period in the Middle Ages, the most intense convergence is observed in the western regions, where the Britons resisted the Saxon invasion for the longest time. Places like Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, Caerleon in Wales, and Tintagel in Cornwall carry the cultural memory of an era when British war chiefs possessed enough loyalty and resources to stand against external powers. Archaeological research offers intriguing parallels with the historical context of late 5th century Britain. Excavations at Tintagel Castle provide tangible evidence for the existence of a high-status settlement during this period. Artifacts such as pottery from the Mediterranean, wine amphorae, and luxury goods reveal that the person governing this remote Cornish stronghold controlled trade networks extending across Europe and was a leader with international connections. Cadbury Castle, long known in regional tradition as the future Camelot, underwent an extensive fortification process in the late 5th century. Large-scale renovations, including new ramparts, gates, and internal buildings, bear the imprint of a ruler capable of mobilizing significant manpower and resources.
Carbon dating results point to this structure coinciding with the period of the historical leader who organized the British resistance against the Saxon invasion. By the time the Arthurian narrative reached the pen of Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, the transformation from war leader to folk hero was complete. the essence of the legend was ready to be molded into literary form. A historical figure who saved a civilization through his achievements was carried toward immortality under the influence of oral tradition and a cultural appreciation that valued both excellence in martial arts and ethical values. The mythical mists of Avalon enveloped this war leader, simultaneously concealing him and revealing the eternal symbolism inherent in his destiny. Amidst these mists, those who dream of great visions of leadership spanning centuries of hopes and dreams will recall the figure who was once and future king. The leader's story transforms into the beginning of a narrative woven with the strength of friendships and the magnitude of sacrifices. Around 1136, Geoffrey of Monmouth, loading ink into his quill in Oxford, was about to begin a new narrative that would overturn the known foundations of historical writing. The Historia Regum Britanniae, or the History of the Kings of Britain, transforms a hard-to-remember war leader into one of history's greatest sovereigns. Geoffrey's text shapes the dream of a kingdom born from the confluence of divine power and human nobility. This dream serves to recontextualize the world shaken by the Norman conquest. Only 66 years had passed since the victory at Hastings in 1066, when Anglo-Saxon England yielded to a French-speaking Norman aristocracy.
Although the Normans arrived on the scene with stone castles, harsh governance, and an unquenchable thirst for power, claiming to bring peace and order, they lacked a spiritual foundation that genuinely connected them to the kingship. They needed a deep-rooted past imbued with sacred harmony to legitimize their rule. This crisis was precisely what inspired the Oxford historian's captivating storytelling. If such a glorious past could be provided for the Norman kings, it would solidify the historical basis of their dominion, making even the deeds of the Frankish descendants of Charlemagne seem pale in comparison. Geoffrey's text not only offers a model of a Christian monarchy blessed by the fusion of military and political power, but also traces Britain's royal lineage back to the ancient legends of Troy. The beginning of the Historia is less about war leaders and more a grand mythological epic extending from Troy to Britain. Brutus, a descendant of Aeneas, crosses the Mediterranean and Gaul, reaches the white cliffs of Britain, and founds New Troy, the future London. This origin story provides a powerful legendary foundation that encourages Britain to be considered on par with Rome's imperial claims. The Normans' 11th century historical fantasy, crafting a fictional genealogy within itself, always progresses toward its main objective with this tale that transcends reality, the reign of the greatest king of Britain. However, this sovereign is only superficially inspired by the Dux Bellorum, who carried Christian symbols against Saxon raiders. This figure,
a product of the Welsh imagination, transcends the borders of post-Roman Britain, transforming into a world-conquering emperor whose achievements eclipse those of Alexander the Great or Caesar. This transformation begins to take shape from the very circumstances of his birth. After the complete silence of the early sources, the Oxford cleric defines the origins of his hero as part of a divine plan, enriching the depiction with a narrative of supernatural intervention. Uther Pendragon, King of Britain, is consumed by a deep and burning desire for the Duchess of Cornwall, while her husband is Duke of Gorlewin. As these forbidden desires threaten to plunge the kingdom into civil war, the wizard Merlin intervenes, sowing the seeds of a romantic legend that will echo through the ages. Merlin proposes a spell of disguise so that love may overcome obstacles. On a stormy night at Tintagel, Uther, through Merlin's magic, assumes the likeness of the Duke of Cornwall. While the real Duke dies in a distant battle, Uther enters the castle and reaches the woman he loves, and thus fate is sealed. Everything is perfectly timed, and the magic is flawless. The result is inevitable. With his supernatural arrival, this child, forged by passion and guided by prophecy, is destined to be Britain's greatest king. This extraordinary origin story completely separates him from ordinary royal lineage. Like Jesus or heroes of classical mythology, his existence is the product of divine intervention that transcends the limits of natural biology. His origins, which instill him with both a mortal lineage and a supernatural power, clearly indicate that he surpasses ordinary rulers. From his very birth, this child is shaped to represent a divine greatness, overcoming mere human frailties. Yet the cleric's skill is not limited to creating this supernatural identity. He also manages to frame it appropriately within the political and spiritual requirements of 12th century monarchy.
The supernatural understanding serves a multifaceted function. This motif explains the future king's extraordinary qualities, legitimizes the unconditional loyalty he expects from his followers, and provides a divine grounding for his ultimate victories. This divine intervention in the narrative transforms into a powerful symbol of the sacred endorsement that validates royal authority. The young king not only inherits the crown and scepter, symbols of worldly power, but is also crowned with a spiritual blessing that transforms him from a brave warrior into a sacred sovereign. This ceremony synthesizes Roman imperial symbols, Christian rituals, and Celtic kingship traditions, presenting a model of a harmonious royal oath where divine will is balanced with human institutions. However, the Welsh writer realizes that medieval society does not expect spiritual perfection alone from its ideal king. The people desire military skill, political wisdom, and the ability to defend the country against both internal and external enemies.
the new sovereign is expected to live up to the extraordinary circumstances of his ascension, demonstrating the impact of his divine grace over the nobles, while proving it with tangible successes by defeating the invading forces. The initial military successes perfectly served this narrative purpose. Saxon raiders attacking the eastern regions quickly realized the new king fights with superhuman power. His cavalry charges scatter the enemy troops like leaves in an autumn storm. The king's strategic vision anticipates enemy movements with near prophetic certainty.
His courage serves as a great source of inspiration for his followers, raising his army's morale with heroic examples that crown seemingly hopeless struggles with victory. Yet, the historian's perspective goes beyond mere defensive wars, offering a vision that extends past cultural and geographical boundaries in the face of threats to Romano-British civilization. The literary king carries English arms to the farthest reaches of the known world. Shortly after his coronation, Ireland falls under his rule. Scotland surrenders following successful campaigns that demonstrate both his impressive tactical genius and his merciful treatment of those captured. These early conquests set the stage for the path his reign will follow. For the king, military success is not solely about territorial expansion, but serves a moral purpose. Each victory allows Christian civilization to spread into lands previously dominated by pagan barbarity. Every conquest brings order and justice in place of chaos and tyranny. Every new territory incorporated into the expanding empire becomes a symbol of divine order triumphing over confusion. This comprehensive expansion beyond the British Isles elevates the story from a simple regional account to an imperial epic. The kings of Norway, who dominate the northern seas, surrender their navies and become part of this growing order by swearing oaths of allegiance. Danish bandits, who for generations had raided Christian monasteries and eventually converted to the true faith, then offered their axes in service to the Kingdom of Britain, earning a distinguished place in the shadows of history. His achievements are so impressive that even the proud French nobles, tracing their route back to Charlemagne, are forced to accept the grand claims of this British emperor. The narratives penned by the Oxford academic about the campaigns in Gaul present a sophisticated understanding of the European politics of the time. Writing during a period when Norman kings ruled both England and significant regions of France, the author frames this complex political arrangement as a natural continuation of history, almost an example of restoration, while creating a mythological foundation for an empire spanning both sides of the English Channel.
This theme, presented as the revival of ancient victories rather than recent conquests, showcases how Britain's greatest triumphs are forged. The legendary literary king's victories in Gaul not only offer a historical justification for the Normans' claims in France, but also solidify Britain's superiority over its continental rivals. The peak of these victories is marked by the moment the historical war leader, defending the last remnants of Roman civilization on British soil, challenges eternal Rome itself. Geoffrey's emperor completes a symbolic transformation by carrying the war into the heart of the Roman Empire, which once ruled the world. Britain, once viewed as a barbarian island adopting Roman legal systems, now emerges as a power imposing its will upon the eternal city, building a new imperial order. This dramatic confrontation is not just the central conflict of the narrative, but also conveys many messages about redefining national identity and historical legitimacy. This reckoning with Rome is dramatically multi-layered. It measures the worth of the British king against the most prestigious military and political power of the Middle Ages, while subjecting him to an ultimate test. In political readings, it suggests that Christian monarchy, guided by divine will, can achieve triumphs far greater than those of former empires. Spiritually, it emphasizes that Britain has inherited Rome's destiny and is now, by divine providence, the new center of world civilization. This emperor marching on the eternal city is a figure vastly different from the old war leader fighting against Saxon invasions for Britain's independence.
The work transcends the boundaries of historical reality, symbolizing what a kingdom operating under divine guidance and adherence to Christian principles can achieve. Conquests take on a content beyond mere contradiction and conflict, representing not just the acquisition of power, but the victory of universal values for humanity. As the historian elevates his hero to a pinnacle of success no monarch could reach, he unknowingly also plants the seeds of the tragedy that will bring about the ruin of everything the great king has built. The very perfection of the empire sets the conditions for its collapse. The absolute loyalty that enabled these glorious conquests also generates the arrogance and ambition that will cleave the kingdom apart. The magical elements that represented divine favor in the king's rise, over time, begin to signify a supernatural collapse and his downfall. Merlin, the wizard who made Uther's plans possible and shaped the young king's initial victories, gradually withdraws from human affairs. The prophecies that once promised unlimited success now begin to bear the traces of an impending catastrophe. The same supernatural forces that propel a man to the zenith of unprecedented achievement also set in motion the tragic end that is inevitable for every hero who dares to cross the boundaries of the mortal world. The introduction of Mordred highlights the human element that points to this tragic fate.
In historical accounts, Mordred is depicted as a nephew rather than an illegitimate son, as he is in later romance stories. Yet, his function is always clear. He is the symbol of the betrayal that corrupts even the most perfect of orders. His presence at court reminds readers that human nature carries its own destruction within, and that even a divine kingdom cannot eternally eradicate the flaws that accompany worldly success. As the story nears its climax, the Welsh cleric's extraordinary transformation of the Arthurian material is notable. A leader once remembered for a few battles has become an emperor known for conquests spanning 3 continents. The tale of a single decisive victory against Saxon invaders has now evolved into a much grander legend. The Dux Bellorum, who struggled to preserve the legacy of Romano-British civilization, is portrayed as a world conqueror, surpassing the achievements of Alexander, Caesar, and Charlemagne. This literary transformation is so powerful that it becomes more enduring than any historical monument. The historian's vision of the ideal Christian king inspires literati for centuries and forms the foundation of the detailed codes of chivalry and courtly traditions that shape Europe's aristocratic culture. Finally, this model of monarchy, founded on divine order and shaped by spiritual principles, is attempted to be translated into political reality, inspiring real rulers. History ends where it began, yet this endless cycle holds a promise of return. The wounded emperor departs for Avalon, neither fully dead nor alive, and waits until Britain needs him once more.
This ambiguous conclusion allows Geoffrey's work to continue evolving over time, inspiring new generations of storytellers to examine the effects and origins of a perfect kingdom. It encourages them to question the tragic fate that awaits all human achievements, no matter how noble or divine their source. The Welsh cleric lays down his pen, perhaps content that he has depicted the king that medieval Europe needed, even if he never truly existed. The ink on the parchment dries like a ship of fantasy, carrying the Arthurian legend far beyond the shores of Britain where it began. The words of this work will be multiplied by scribes across Europe, and the vision of the once and future king will spread to every corner of the Christian world. Thus, the portrait of a king is completed. But this is only the beginning. The time has come for the birth of a legend that will outlive the kingdoms that inspired it. Before the Welsh historian's masterpiece is fully dry, new authors and storytellers will take up this legend, transforming it and shaping the ages. Arthur becomes an unforgettable figure, not just through conquests, but through his representation of the revolutionary ideals of the era: companionship, justice, and sacred commitment that were brought to life by the love songs of the bards and the dreams of honor among poets in the 12th century European courts. He is no longer an emperor who conquers nations, but the representative of an innovative kingship that redefines leadership and ignites a 1,000-year yearning. Around 1155, Meister Wasse, a craftsman working at the Norman court, embarks on a task that will forever impact European literature. King Henry II, grandson of William the Conqueror and ruler of an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees, commissions his court poet to transform the Latin chronicle into a French verse poem. This effort is more than a mere translation.
The resulting work perfectly aligns with the aesthetic and political ideals of the era, unveiling a new vision of monarchy that explores the boundaries of courtly refinement. This work, Romain de Berthe, distinguishes itself from previous stories of merely powerful kings by introducing a much broader innovation: the Round Table itself. This imagined order alters the narrative of Arthur, who once only ruled loyal followers, and becomes a striking symbol woven into the fabric of the time. The Norman poet creates a unique institution based on the revolutionary principles of warrior equality and sacred brotherhood.
This circular arrangement presents an order where no seat surpasses another. The greatest warriors of the world, liberated from feudal obligations, unite through shared ideals, transcending the simple bonds between lord and vassal, and gather in a spirit of comradeship. This circular fellowship is more than a poetic fantasy. It carries deeper meanings. It addresses the fundamental tensions that challenged the courts where such narratives were most celebrated in feudal society. Medieval nobles constantly struggled with issues of precedence, honor, and legitimate authority. Who would sit closest to the king? Which warrior was worthy to undertake the most difficult quest? How were conflicting claims, such as inherited privilege, wealth, or merit, to be resolved within the confines of a court? The Round Table offers an elegant solution to these problems, an ideal of brotherhood that values merit above wealth and virtue above bloodline. In this ideal, status is determined solely by worthiness. This novelty is quite a lavish indulgence, especially during a time when European courts were exploring new possibilities for aristocratic life. The hardened warriors who carried the Normans to England give way to the descendants of their lineage. The new generation consists of individuals educated in Latin letters, embracing courtly manners, and introduced to sophisticated concepts like honor, love, and spiritual refinement.
These New Age warriors are driven not just by physical strength, but by a developing awareness of the meaning of nobility. Their new stories reflect this shift. With works like Layamont's Brut, written in the 1200s, these narratives begin to spread across linguistic boundaries into Middle English. During this change, the language addressed is that of the conquered rather than the language of the conquerors. An English priest adds mystical and supernatural elements more prominently to the story, blending them with natural landscapes familiar to the readers, producing a striking effect. Thus, the Round Table moves beyond being a mere piece of court furniture. It becomes a sacred symbol where divine will is manifested through human fellowship. This version, created in a language understandable to the local populace, shows how the tales of King Arthur were adapted to different cultural contexts. It is also observed that the fundamental appeal of these stories is maintained. For Norman listeners, complex questions of court protocol are important, while English readers focus on themes of the search for justice, the protection of the weak, and resistance to tyranny. This brotherhood transforms into a symbol of hope for ordinary people who dream of leaders to protect them against oppression, whether from foreign invaders, corrupt rulers, or marauding nobles. These early narratives set the foundations that will determine the direction of the Arthurian legend for centuries. Each generation discovers elements within this legend that respond to its own anxieties, fears, and aspirations. The main story remains constant,
A great king establishes a fellowship of warriors dedicated to protecting the innocent and upholding justice. However, the details diverge, adapting to changing social dynamics, evolving religious understandings, and new political realities.
The courtly concept emerging from these early romances unveils a groundbreaking vision of what monarchy can achieve when governed according to Christian principles and when justice is prioritized over individual interests. This is a reflection of kingship evolving from Germanic war leadership to a divine sovereignty, where the ruler's primary duty is not to bring wealth to his followers, but to establish an order where virtue can flourish and the powerless can be protected. Camelot, the symbol of ideal governance embodied in stone and wood carvings, rises on lush meadows surrounding a flowing river. With its white towers reflecting the sunlight, the structure resembles a worldly reflection of the New Jerusalem. Strong ramparts enclose courtyards where martial arts are tested. Gardens offer peaceful settings for contemplation and formal conversations. The Great Hall possesses a grandeur that impresses and inspires awe in those who enter. Its vaulted ceiling is adorned with depictions of saints and angels, surrounded by banners bearing the coats of arms of knights from all corners of the Christian world. However, at the heart of the hall lies an extraordinary element that deepens the meaning of the space: the round table. Carved from a massive oak tree, the table is meticulously polished, its smooth surface achieving an elegant appearance. The grain patterns of the wood flow like rivers of gold, and the name of the knight to sit in each chair is inscribed in silver letters. The 13 empty chairs reserved for heroes whose names are yet unknown symbolize that the doors of the brotherhood will forever remain open to anyone who meets the requirements of honor and responsibility.
The true glory of this court resides not merely in its material wealth, but in the depths of the spirit of fellowship it encourages. Warriors who spent their lives competing for fame and glory eventually shed their individual ambitions and discover the joy of fraternal bonds. Veterans who have survived countless battles find meaning beyond victory, turning their attention to causes in the service of divine justice. Young champions, on the other hand, learn that true honor lies not merely in defeating enemies, but in protecting the vulnerable. This transformation in understanding within 12th century Europe also reflects the broader social and cultural changes of the era. The Church's Peace of God movement aimed to protect non-combatants and limit the destructive effects of war, while the rise of the concept of courtly love introduced new ideals of masculinity centered on service, courtesy, and spiritual refinement. The Arthurian court acts as a laboratory where these ideas are developed and tested. In such a context, writers create a fictional space where they can experiment with radical ideas about the potential transformation of aristocratic society. The concept of the circular fellowship establishes rules that govern the conduct of the warrior class, rules that are not just literary descriptions. For centuries, these regulations transcend simple combat tactics, encompassing obligations that range from protecting women and children to aiding the poor. It is also expected that they defend the church's assets, offer a helping hand to the oppressed, and adopt the courage to speak the truth as a way of life. Such values demand not only physical bravery, but also a powerful moral resilience from the warriors, transforming them into almost secular saints.
Before taking his seat at the fellowship table, every new member swears a sacred oath to maintain the fear of God, protect the church, serve his Lord with loyalty, watch over the defenseless, and aid widows and orphans. Furthermore, they commit to fighting for the good of others, despising unnecessary materialism and avoiding unjust gains. They promise to live by honor and glory and are willing to make sacrifices for the sake of truth and justice. The power of this oath, uttered with the blessing of priests, forms bonds greater than blood or gold. The warriors gathered at the circular board represent different facets of the ideals of chivalry. Each is the embodiment of virtues that medieval people considered indispensable for a Christian warrior. Sir Gawain, the king's nephew, sets an example in protecting the innocent and approaching them with courtesy. His power waxes and wanes parallel to the cycle of the sun, as the champion of divine light against the forces of darkness. His adventures focus on protecting those who cannot defend themselves, ranging from damsels in distress to besieged castles and kingdoms threatened by supernatural evils. Sir Kay, the foster brother who serves as seneschal, is the embodiment of the virtue of loyalty that transcends personal ambitions. Although sometimes depicted as harsh and occasionally harboring envy toward his more brilliant companions, Sir Kay never loses his devotion to the king. This figure, once an ordinary child, rises thanks to Sir Kay's loyalty, showing the audience that true nobility can be found in humble service rather than flashy adventures, and that respect is due to those who undertake the daily tasks to enable the successes of others.
Sir Bedivere, the one-handed warrior who serves as the king's marshal, is a powerful symbol of absolute fidelity. His physical impairment further emphasizes his spiritual fortitude and commitment to ideals, demonstrating that true strength comes not only from physical perfection, but from dedication to high principles. In later narratives, Bedivere appears as both the last companion standing by his dying master and the bearer of the sacred ritual that returns Excalibur to its source, the mystic waters. The Knight of the Lion represents the harmony by which civilization and nature can be united by divine will. His adventures mostly involve restoring order in situations where human pride or thoughtless actions have disrupted the natural balance. Whether defending a magical spring, rescuing a noble beast, or fighting to reclaim inheritances stolen by impostors, the knight, along with his lion companion,
symbolizes that divine grace can turn even the wild into an ally of justice. These initial heroes form the archetypes that will resonate in the love-themed literature of subsequent ages. While each represents a specific aspect of the chivalric concept, they remain human enough to face temptations, failures, and complex moral choices. Their adventures contain moral lessons for people navigating the increasingly complex social world of medieval Europe. The institution of the quest arises from the idea that virtue must be proven through action. Unlike the conquest-focused campaigns of the old war leaders, these quests serve moral goals more than political gains. These heroes set out not to expand territories or gain treasures, but to right wrongs, rescue the innocent, and reflect the values of their own fellowship.
Every adventure is a moral test where the character is challenged, revealing the true nature of the concept of quest. These stories are also full of opportunities for spiritual growth and moral maturity. The quest narratives are shaped around specific themes that reflect the medieval understanding of spiritual progress. The hero receives an invitation to an adventure that questions his commitment to chivalric ideals. This journey is filled with challenges that test his courage, wisdom, and virtue. Along the way, he frequently meets guides, often of a supernatural nature, who offer support and guidance. At some point, the hero faces a critical trial where he must choose between conflicting values or sacrifice personal desires for a higher purpose. Finally, he returns to his court with the inner transformation gained from his experiences and with gifts that will benefit the entire community. The tournament culture of 12th century Europe provides a real-world context for the imaginary ideals voiced in Arthurian romances. These elaborate fighting competitions allow warriors to display their skills in a relatively safe environment. They also become a stage for the elegant courtly behaviors highlighted by romantic literature. Tournaments transform into a medium where life and art intertwine, and real champions strive to embody admirable virtues. From a perspective focused on literary heroes, the close relationship between tournament culture and Arthurian ideals is palpable. These romances, inspired by the stories of the circular community, aim to exalt courtesy and generosity and the ideals of protecting the weak in real competitions. Writers of romance observing the tournaments add realistic fighting depictions and details about court protocol to their fiction, blurring the line between literature and life. Thus, these two spheres evolve into a situation where they mutually influence one another.
This interaction between fiction and reality finds its most comprehensive expression in the chivalric orders that emerged in later medieval Europe. Military religious orders like the Knights Templar and similar groups exemplified Christian warrior ideals, establishing institutions dedicated to protecting pilgrims, defending holy sites,
and serving the church. Furthermore, secular chivalric orders, particularly organizations like the Order of the Garter, explicitly reference the Arthurian legend in their ceremonies and ideals. Symbols like the Round Table, which embody the concept of equality among warriors, are reflections of the broader social changes taking place in Europe at the time. With the rise of universities, new understandings of knowledge emerged, challenging traditional hierarchies based solely on nobility or military skill. Urban growth gave rise to merchant classes, who acquired wealth comparable to that of the land-owning nobility. Monastic reform movements encouraged a focus on spiritual merit rather than worldly status. The Arthurian court provides a fictional ground for understanding how changing social dynamics could be integrated with existing aristocratic structures. Although the circular table symbolizes democratic ideals reminiscent of modern notions of equality, it remains tightly bound to the medieval understanding of hierarchy and divine authority. While the table eliminates any precedence among companions, it still preserves an order where the king, seated at its head, rules by divine right. In this environment, a sense of brotherhood among equals flourishes.
However, this equality manifests only within a carefully defined group of Christian warriors who have proven their martial and moral superiority. This revolutionary structure exists only in a limited way, whether in real life or imagination. The tension between democratic fellowship and monarchical authority brings forth striking possibilities debated in the literary world for centuries. How can a king maintain authority over warriors who view themselves as equals? When and how does the collective wisdom of the fellowship conflict with royal decrees? Can the integrity of the fellowship withstand pressures such as conflicting loyalties? Conflicting duties and elements of jealousy in human nature fuel these questions, shaping narratives that emphasize the practical difficulties of bringing even idealized fictional structures to life. Merlin's role also evolves in these adaptations, moving away from his traditional identity based on prophecy and sorcery. Romance literature portrays Merlin as a figure no different than a philosopher who governs the realm with wisdom, transcending mere supernatural powers. His guidance is not limited to military strategies. It also influences the moral and spiritual development of the champions who will assume the responsibility of protecting the realm. Over time, the gradual withdrawal of the wizard from court affairs, coupled with the slow diminution of magical protection, leaves more room for human will. The warriors are increasingly forced to rely on their own judgment, courage, and commitment to the ideals Merlin established. This transition from supernatural guidance to human responsibility reflects medieval culture's growing emphasis on individual moral choices and personal accountability.
As writers explore the connection between chivalric virtues and Christian salvation, religious elements become more pronounced in these stories. The circular fellowship nurtures not only worldly justice, but also eternal goals, and the adventures of each warrior contribute to the cosmic struggle between good and evil that will shape the destiny of human souls. The nature of the quests changes. External adventures transform into a spiritual pilgrimage reflecting internal moral development. The concept of courtly love accompanying Arthurian romances introduces a deep complexity into the destinies of the warriors, moving beyond the simple and masculine world of early military literature. At this juncture, warriors must contend not only with the challenges of battlefields and quests, but also with the elegant rules of aristocratic romance. Alongside their devotion to their king and the bravery they display in war, they learn the subtleties of serving women. However, this process of development prepares the beginning of tragic events that prevent the perfect preservation of the bonds of brotherhood. The essence of these early romances represents the embodiment of humanity's noblest ideals in earthly forms. These stories depict a justice free from oppression, a power without cruelty, a friendship devoid of separation, and a leadership distant from tyranny. Yet the fact that such perfection cannot last is also not denied. Although medieval audiences knew that all worldly institutions carried the seeds of their own destruction, through such literary works, they had the chance to briefly witness what communities guided by divine inspiration and dedicated to justice rather than self-interest could achieve.
Over time, these stories travel across Europe, disseminating revolutionary ideas about kingship, nobility, and social structure. These ideas do not remain mere literary fantasies. They play an active role in real political developments for centuries. Real kings try to emulate Arthur's virtues, while real warriors shape their own conduct according to the scales of righteousness held by the legendary heroes. Political theorists present the court of Camelot as a model for what monarchy can achieve when properly implemented. Thus, even a fictional kingdom transforms into a powerful catalyst for social change. These influences become the triggers for reforms where literary ideals inspire the real world. In this way, the splendor of the Golden Age rises. The Round Table shines with the light of unity and friendship. Defenders of Christianity who dedicate their lives to these ideals where ambitions are transformed into sacred causes shape the universal values of humanity. One of the most intense moments of this vision occurs when the king surveys his community. The satisfaction in his eyes reflects a respect mingled with joy. He knows he has achieved a success unparalleled in history. Yet, on the other hand, he demonstrates humility with deep respect for the fragility of institutions built upon the virtues of entirely mortal individuals. The dark possibilities hidden in the shadows beyond the great halls and in the flames of burning fireplaces provide a driving force for the perfection of friendship, while also creating expectations that no earthly institution can ever sustain. The success story of the Brotherhood attracts warriors who deviate from the initial pure intentions, yielding to more complex, less innocent desires. The splendor and allure of the court attract women whose beauty can be more dangerous than the wildest dragon. These women may force choices that sever sacred oaths and the bonds of feudal loyalty.
The Round Table is finally formed, and the 13th siege awaits with dangerous patience. At this stage, a champion is expected to emerge who will witness both the Brotherhood's most glorious triumph and the beginning of its inevitable collapse.
The greatest warriors gathered around the Round Table prepare for epic adventures that will push the limits of human virtue. Yet, in this process, they prove that even the most sublime ideals must succumb to mortal weaknesses. The Golden Age has begun, but the forces that will end it are blossoming precisely in the hearts of lovers. Here, honor gains a value beyond life. Perhaps it becomes more valuable than life itself. Camelot rises as a powerful symbol of hope, casting light on a dark world while also carrying the traces of its own dark future. The Round Table Fellowship is ready to face every challenge that destiny presents. They are bound tightly to one another, as solid as steel, yet more delicate than morning dew. In their pursuit of a perfection that the mortal body can never sustain, they embark on a journey that will inspire generations after them. But when the rise is complete, the fall becomes inevitable. Around 1177, a French poet takes up his pen to create one of the most complex and dangerous stories in European literature. Born from the encouragement of Marie, Countess of Champagne, and daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine, this work presents a tale that transforms the perfect fellowship of the Round Table into the tragedy of human desires. This story introduces a character who overturns divine laws, embodying both the promises and the flaws of the chivalric ideal. Joining the world of Arthur like a comet blazing in the clear sky, this champion is both unique and destructive. He will simultaneously symbolize Camelot's greatness and initiate its process of self-destruction. He makes it clear that even the concept of perfection carries the seeds of its own downfall.
When the human heart dares to cross the lines of honor and duty, this groundbreaking story brings radical changes to the contemporary world. New ideas about romantic love, honor, and the relationships between noble women and men emerge. This transformation lays the foundation for an epic that will be fed by legends and told for centuries. The salons of Eleanor of Aquitaine in Poitiers and the assemblies of her daughter Marie in Troyes functioned as laboratories for exploring innovative understandings of emotional attachment that questioned fundamental accepted notions like marriage, fidelity, and spiritual devotion. Troubadour poetry idealized adulterous love as the highest form of human experience, while elite aristocratic women debated whether genuine feelings could exist within arranged marriages. This cultural revolution provides a context for a masterpiece of moral complexity in creativity. La Chevalier de la Charrette, the Knight of the Cart, does not merely introduce a new character, it brings a fundamentally different approach that reinterprets the relationship between earthly devotion and spiritual salvation. While previous romances often depicted women as rewards for heroic achievements or symbols of divine grace,
Marie's narrative centers human desire as both the source of the noblest virtues and the cause of the most terrifying destruction. This story begins with a hero considered one of the world's best warriors, yet whose birth is veiled in secrecy. This champion, naturally possessing an extraordinary background, was raised by the Lady of the Lake in an underwater realm where time operated differently and earthly laws did not apply. Though endowed with supernatural abilities, he was introduced into the mortal world lacking the spiritual immunity that divine upbringing offers.
His perfection as a warrior leaves him vulnerable to the one frailty that can threaten the excellence of fellowship and loyalty. The royal consort, on the other hand, symbolizes the difficult position women faced within the medieval aristocracy. Married not for her own desires, but to serve political alliances, she is valued and crowned based on the continuation of her lineage rather than her individual worth. Trapped between the roles of sacred, sovereign, and mortal woman simultaneously, this figure finds herself married to a perfect ruler. However, she discovers that the perfect virtues found in an ideal spouse can cause as much loneliness as tyranny, and that being married to a legend leaves virtually no room for the expression of personal desires or individual will. When the world's greatest warrior and the realm's most beautiful woman confront each other, this encounter spells disaster for all. Chrétien, with extremely restrained language, narrates this first meeting, which echoes an unspoken awareness that both transcends and threatens every bond that sustains civilization. The attraction at first sight grows in power, merging with that inevitable force seen in every flawless sunset over Camelot, a force as potent as a dragon's destructiveness or the irresistibility of a magical impulse. Yet the protector, trained by the Lady of the Lake with supernatural abilities, is prepared for every challenge except this emotion. He can defeat any foe in a duel, but he fails to conquer his own heart. He can resist the pull of pride, greed, and worldly ambition. However, he loses his strength before the beauty that embodies the noblest and purest qualities of the civilization he swore to protect. The royal bride becomes for him a faith, a vow of commitment, a hope for salvation, a love, and simultaneously a curse. But the king's wife is also caught in the clutches of impossible choices.
She owes allegiance to a deserving ruler, to her king who harbors only absolute trust in her, and to the kingdom that views her as the embodiment of virtue. But as a woman, she recognizes in the great champion the first person who sees her as a genuine individual, who loves her for her personality rather than just her crown, and who offers a devotion that the obligations of marriage could not provide. The conflict between duty and desire turns into a tragic choice between two different betrayals, either violating her marriage vows or silencing her own heart. Amidst this profound tragedy, the royal council fails to recognize
how dangerous the initial crack that has emerged is. The sovereign, in his belief in his own virtue and his most loyal protector, cannot conceive that the order he established could harbor its own contradictions and destruction. The Round Table still bears the symbol of absolute equality among warriors, yet this equality begins to lose its meaning when a warrior's allegiance is divided between two masters. The other champions begin to sense this change, even if they do not know the source of the emerging tension. On the other hand, those who, like Gawain, can sense disturbances in the balance of life, notice small shifts in the order of court life. Kay observes his foster brother's increasing restlessness without being able to precisely identify the reasons. Even Bedivere, known for his supreme loyalty, looks at one of the strongest champions with eyes he cannot fathom while trying to surpass the Lake Knight's mastery. Works penned by Meredith France and other master storytellers peel back the layers of the inner worlds of individuals caught between competing loyalties through narratives that delve deep into the human psyche. These stories impressively show that a passionate attraction can exalt the human spirit, but it can also lead to the unraveling of the social bonds that sustain civilization.
These narratives, entrenched in the French Romance tradition, powerfully affect audiences by emphasizing the devastating wounds that selfless service can inflict even on the bravest heroes, lending these stories a cultural depth. They echo the obsessive feelings that drive civilization toward ruin, an echo that reaches across the ages. When a mysterious dwarf offers to reveal the location of the royal consort, the perfect champion finds himself in an unexpected dilemma. He is confronted with the choice of traveling in a cart reserved for common criminals. His pride tells him that he should never accept such humiliation. Yet, his powerful love compels him to endure any shame in the hope of approaching his lady. This momentary hesitation, lasting just 2 beats, becomes the beginning of a great mistake that will shape all future events. A mistake he will attempt to atone for with every subsequent step. This part of the story reveals the foundation of the moral and emotional complexity in their relationship. The unwavering commitment to the royal bride sets the champion on a path that will both exalt and shatter him. His desire for impeccable service enables him to achieve unprecedented successes, but at the same time, the division in his loyalty increasingly creates an internal conflict. Every victory he wins turns into a defeat for the ideals of fellowship that chivalric values are committed to. The tournament at Nanduri reveals how romantic passion can transform heroic virtues into a frantic obsession. At the critical moment of the tournament, the royal consort orders her champion to fight with all his might. The best warrior in the world becomes a subject of ridicule. He yields to the inferior opponents, fighting him simply because his lady wishes it. When the bride retracts her order, he overcomes all his opponents with almost supernatural effort. The crowd watches in awe as the greatest champion they have ever seen uses his abilities not just for justice and honor, but to serve a woman's will.
This boundless devotion of the champion creates a paradox that both exalts and violates the values the chivalric tradition seeks to protect. This warrior, born in the lake, demonstrates that his love is not limited to physical passion, but reaches a dimension of spiritual dedication. However, the dangerous potential of this devotion, being strong enough to disregard all other loyalties, threatens the balance of the feudal order. If the greatest warriors direct all their obligations to ladies rather than lords, how can any kingdom maintain the necessary unity and order? The royal consort is also caught in the very heart of this paradox, trapped in the dilemma created by her champion's boundless devotion to her. The champion's flawless service simultaneously makes her the most powerful woman in the kingdom and the most desperate. You can steer the greatest warriors with just a glance, but you cannot govern them without granting them the freedom to be completely honest with you without losing the meaning of that bond. The fame that makes her worthy of such devotion is also an indication that her full acceptance would bring disaster to all. Yet, she carries this burden willingly. As rumors spread through the court, the sovereign's authority becomes increasingly fragile. His greatness as a leader is tied to his ability to create unconditional loyalty among his followers. However, it is impossible to demand this loyalty without eroding the trust that gives it meaning. Doubt poisons the very fellowship that is the most precious achievement of his leadership. Yet, ignoring it intentionally makes him seem either incapable or naive in maintaining his royal honor.
The fellowship slowly begins to fall apart along thin but deeply affecting cracks. Warriors who once competed only for success in pursuit of a common ideal are now forced to choose sides in a conflict that non-dairy has openly acknowledged. Some maintain their loyalty due to feudal allegiance or personal affection for the king, while others, having lost faith in the royalty, take the knight and new values as their guide. Gawain becomes the symbol of this deep division beginning within. Whatever his flaws, his loyalty touches his sovereign, his nephew, and his sworn companion. However, this loyalty clashes with the absolute commitment exalted by chivalric culture. The great champion whom Gawain admires becomes a metaphor for the harmony and complexity of the community. He rises and falls, reflecting the cycle of the sun. Gareth and Geraint, Gawain's younger brothers, represent the hesitations of the younger generation trying to find their way in this dissolving fellowship and searching for moral guidance. But they realize that the heroes they seek are trapped in impossible moral dilemmas. Their purity makes them vulnerable to disappointment, as it shows that the council's great champions are not flawless. The contradictions within these stories gain literary depth by raising the complexities between romantic ideals and moral responsibility. The idea of the perfect breach dominating the romance tradition offers an effort to transcend traditional values and elevate loyalty and bonds to a new spiritual level. Those who advocate this ideology believe that true devotion in human relationships can exalt both parties, taking them beyond ordinary morality, while opponents argue it is a deviation that threatens the foundation of society. Chrétien addresses these contradictory interpretations with a narrative technique that rejects simplistic moral judgments. His hero represents both the splendor and the tragedy of refined love, achieving successes that surpass all previous heroes, while simultaneously betraying the fellowship that made those successes possible.
The French poet forces his audience to confront the impossible choices faced by his heroes and questions how truly reprehensible the destructive consequences that great courage brings with it are. In this context, the influence of troubadour poetry on the poet is quite noticeable. Poets like Bernard de Ventadorn, Donne, and Geoffrey developed a sophisticated language to describe the psychological states that deep devotion could create, showing that yearning could both exalt and profoundly sadden the human soul. Their works form the necessary cultural backdrop for aristocratic circles in particular to understand the impossible situation experienced by the Lake Knight. The author lends political weight to the literary themes by seeing similar noble sufferings, which were also exalted by the poets of his time in the difficulties of Eleanor of Aquitaine's life. Her marriage to King Louis VII of France ended because she could not produce a male heir. Her marriage to King Henry II of England led to political tensions that shaped European diplomacy. The literary trends that question traditional assumptions about marriage and fidelity are linked to Eleanor's experience of the conflict between dynastic politics and individual happiness. The royal court becomes a center for the development of new models of behavior that changed perceptions about the roles of women in aristocratic society. Women who were once only symbols of family honor or rewards for male heroism begin to gain visibility as independent individuals with the power to determine their own destinies. This allows characters like the royal consort to function as independent actors rather than merely passive objects of male desire. Nevertheless, even these radical changes are constrained by the era's understanding of hierarchy, divine authority, and social stability. The bond of love between the Lake Knight and the King's Bride may transcend conventional morality with its purity and intensity. But this bond cannot escape the political and spiritual repercussions of adultery on Christian doctrine and kingdoms founded on the feudal order.
Though their emotional connection appears flawless, the world in which such relationships exists is still fraught with human flaws. The development of confession as a literary device allows writers to delve deeper into the inner worlds of individuals caught between conflicts of loyalty. The characters can reflect their full awareness of their moral dilemmas and simultaneously be cognizant of the spiritual consequences
of the decisions they make. This method transforms the romance from a simple adventure story into a rich psychological analysis that delves into the complex motivations that govern human behavior. The role played by fortune in such stories reflects the medieval understanding of the relationship between divine providence and human will. Characters may view themselves as destined to one another by cosmic forces they cannot control. However, their reactions and choices in the face of these forces are entirely their own. The tragedy in the stories is often the result not of external pressure, but of the inevitable conflicts between different forms of loyalty that virtuous people struggle to resolve. Andreas Capellanus, writing around the same time as the Chevalier de la Charette, penned The Art of Courtly Love at the request of Marie, Countess of Champagne. Capellanus argues here that true love can exist outside of marriage, and that it guides individuals away from selfish desires to serve a higher purpose. This theoretical explanation gives meaning to the behavioral patterns in the stories mentioned. However, critics argue that Capellanus' views legitimize adultery and threaten the fundamental values of Christian society by undermining parental authority. In later versions, the Castle of Joyous Guard becomes a symbol of a private world created by individuals aspiring to break free from the constraints of courtly society. This fortress, built as a reward for service at midnight and serving as a refuge for forbidden love, symbolizes both the possibility of escape from social limitations and the near impossibility of sustaining that escape. No structure or wall can fully exclude the political and spiritual realities that make their bond so immense and tragic. The scenes detailing the development of the romantic relationship prove Chrétien's ability to create striking depictions with multiple levels of meaning. The first kiss, taking place in a garden surrounded by roses blooming close to winter, symbolizes both the natural beauty of their relationship and the tragedy of its untimeliness. The secret meetings in rooms adorned with tapestries depicting famous romantic figures highlight the atmospheric elegance of the setting, while also carrying a subtle message that such tales often end in tragedy. The slow revelation of the relationship to the council members transforms the narrative into a dramatic tension that brings it to the brink of an inevitable crisis. Agravain, Gawain's brother and the least virtuous member of the fellowship, begins to gather evidence that can be used to tarnish the reputation of the champion, revealing his own weaknesses. This transforms him into an instrument of evil. Individual sins become public scandals, and personal catastrophes trigger political upheavals. The trap that exposes the secret relationship reveals that even the most careful precautions cannot permanently conceal those who defy societal norms. Agravain and 12 companions steal into the royal consort's chamber under the cover of night, confronting undeniable evidence. The world's greatest warrior, despite his armament and semi-nude bravery, is forced to overpower the fellowship members and flee capture.
This unfolding scene exposes all the contradictions that accumulated throughout the story. The champion's mastery allows him to defeat his armed opponents under difficult circumstances, once again revealing the uniqueness of his ability.
However, his presence in the king's wife's private chamber in the dead of night offers no excusable purpose, no matter how skillfully it is attempted to be explained. Though the champion's skill allows him to escape the consequences, the situation becomes a truth that exposes his guilt. The fellowship that once united all champions toward a common goal now gives rise to enmities in a conflict where no one should have to fight. As slanders and infidelities are revealed, the unity the fellowship warriors built against their common enemies is damaged. In this new chaos where sides are chosen, the Lake Knight's supporters argue that his service to the kingdom outweighs his personal failings, while the king's loyalists assert that treason and the violation of marriage vows can never be covered up by any victory. The royal consort is condemned to death for crimes like treason and adultery under medieval law. Though she represents the virtues that society must protect, she is now imprisoned by the very laws that guard those virtues. Even her status as the sovereign's bride cannot save her from this bitter end. The Round Table, a symbol of justice in the courts, cannot change the lover's fate, representing the impartiality of judgment. The champion's attempt to rescue her from execution gives rise to one of the most shocking and tragic moments of the conflict in the council. In a last-minute romantic show of heroism, he overcomes all obstacles and rescues the royal consort, taking her to safety. However, among those he kills are the unarmed innocents, Gareth and Geraint, who did not wish for the execution to take place. These deaths attach a deep sense of guilt to his name, one that no achievement can erase, casting his future into dark shadows.
Gawain's transformation from a loyal friend to a relentless enemy reveals how the bonds of fellowship can dissolve in the face of corruption. This situation is akin to destructive effects that spread insidiously, like poison seeping into a well. The tragic death of his beloved younger brothers, the result of a chaotic moment during the rescue, transforms him from the most compassionate hero to an avenger dedicated to destroying the one he once admired. Amidst the chaos and destruction, the worshippers attempt to preserve their own existence, weakening the bonds that constituted the fellowship. The siege of Joyous Gard marks the point where this private tragedy escalates into a broader war. The sovereign, against his own conscience, but under the pressure of the kingdom's needs and the nobility, organizes a campaign targeting the champion who had served him faithfully for years. The castle, initially conceived as a sanctuary from the world's chaos, now becomes the focal point of a conflict that threatens the entire kingdom. The fellowship, divided into two opposing camps, reveals the extent to which the institution has become corrupted, and that it was never designed strongly enough to deal with such situations.
Warriors who were once bound by the same oaths and served common ideals now stand on opposite sides of the siege. Though each group believes its cause is superior, the circular table that once represented equality and unity now stands empty. Its perfect form mocks the fractured fellowship it was meant to represent. The Pope's intervention, demanding the return of the royal consort to her husband and the establishment of peace, brings a temporary solution that does not fundamentally satisfy the parties. The sovereign's bride returns to royal duties with her reputation irreparably damaged, while the Lake Knight is exiled. Taking many of the Fellowship's defenders with him, he retreats to the continental lands. Thus, the Fellowship finds peace only through division, but this peace comes with the permanent separation of the elements that made it special.
Yet, this compromise cannot fully mend the deep rift. The intense romantic bond that defined Arthur's world now appears irreparable. The kingdom, which represented humanity's most sublime achievements, is now riddled with invisible wounds that will never fully heal. The once perfect fellowship had learned that human excellence is subject to its own limits, and that the greatest ideals must confront the power of individual desires. The bond between the deceased champion and the royal consort endures despite all the destruction, bearing the indelible scars of the catastrophe. This attachment, which reveals both the sublime power of human love and the tragic failure to exist peacefully within the constraints required by civilization, symbolizes everything that refined culture praised about romance. Yet, it also exposes the fragility of the social order that this attachment threatens. The world's greatest warrior withdraws into exile, knowing that the perfection he attained as a champion is equal to his failure in loyal devotion. Meanwhile, the most beautiful woman in Christendom returns to her throne. The Fellowship bears the burden of choices that tarnished the solidarity it was meant to inspire. A perfect sovereign confronting the collapse of the greatest achievement he witnessed understands that even divine grace cannot prevent the harm caused by human frailties. The Fellowship, which was expected to stand tall in all its glory, totters on the brink of dissolution. Torn apart by forces no virtue could withstand, this bond leads to the corruption of the loyalty it hoped to exalt, and the separation of the service it was meant to unite. The fragility inherent in human dreams transforms enduring perfection into a mortal dream.
The survivors now prepare for the struggle to create something meaningful from the ashes of ideals that imperfect hearts desired to reach but seemed impossible. This effort, shouldering the weight of a destruction tied to arguably the greatest romantic story ever told, navigates the cracks within European literature. The role of perfection, designed to prevent such a catastrophe, now seeks to guide this story and carries the hope of reuniting people. Thousands of poets will continue for years to to explore the power of feelings that transcend the sense of duty, the beauty that is far more captivating than honor, and the influence of a loyalty more dangerous than the dragons the chivalric virtue sought to eliminate. In the scattered pieces of a romantic catastrophe that finds meaning at the end of all these quests, hope will blossom. When Christianity's strongest devotions are torn down, a brand new voice of redemption accompanies personal tragedies. Robert de Boron, writing in the early 13th century, takes the disorderly love stories of the Arthurian age and shapes a healing narrative that will reach beyond the wounds. His innovative approach is more revolutionary than any sword in a stone. The turning point in the narrative is the presentation of Christ's chalice to a world searching for grace. This holy object, holding the blood shed at Calvary and consecrated at the Last Supper, symbolizes the path to eternal salvation. Simultaneously, it carries deep meanings that connect sorrowful mortal lives to eternal peace. The French writer's genius is not limited to borrowing religious imagery, but in transforming the ancient Celtic cauldron traditions, creating a Christian symbolism that feeds the spirit of his age. De Boron's Christian imagination envisions the magical cauldrons of the Celtic otherworld, which could bring the dead back to life and never empty, as an eternal source that transcends the temporal and nourishes souls rather than bodies.
This transformation reflects the broader cultural change in medieval Europe, where pagan traditions evolved into Christian interpretations. This transition preserves the admiration and yearning for the ancient world while transforming the power of archaic traditions. The guardian of the most sacred relic resides in a mystical castle that exists simultaneously in the physical world and the realm of eternity, called the Rift. The wounded king rules over a barren land until the right hero arrives and asks the right question. In this desolate territory, nothing grows and no rain falls. His suffering symbolizes the condition of the world wounded by sins, while his healing promises salvation to those who serve God with pure faith. This figure is reshaped in de Boron's unique vision, combining different mythological traditions with Christian practice. The concept of the wounded ruler in Celtic mythology merges with the Christian understanding of vicarious suffering, transforming him into a protector who connects personal pain with a cosmic duty. Like Christ, this ruler bears wounds that heal others, endures suffering that brings salvation, and patiently awaits the fulfillment of divine promise. The spear that pierces the rift is known in Christian tradition as the weapon that pierced the side of the crucified Christ, its constantly dripping blood serving as a reminder of the wounds that human sins inflicted upon the world. This spear represents the cost of mercy and the continuous struggle underlying the promise of renewal. The mystical castle is the symbol of the connection between earthly woes and celestial salvation. Existing outside of time and space, this castle is visible only to those who have reached a certain level in their spiritual development. It is sometimes described as floating on a lake that reflects heavenly landscapes. Other times, it sits atop a mountain so high its peak touches the sky, or within a magical forest where trees bear fruit in every season.
However, reaching this castle requires much more than physical courage. The journey is a test of the soul rather than fighting skills. Phantom armies that vanish upon touching holy water question the seeker's faith. Bridges over chasms collapse, unable to bear the weight of corrupted intentions. Gatekeepers who appear as terrifying demons only reveal themselves as guardian angels to those who do not surrender to despair. The interior of the castle transcends the limits of human imagination, both in its beauty and in its deep meaning. Walls covered with shimmering precious stones seem to emit their own light. In closed chambers, angelic music suggests an atmosphere of continuous worship. Tapestries woven with gold threads depict scenes of salvation. Crystal windows admit light originating not from the sun or moon, but from the glorious presence of the Almighty God. At the very heart of the castle is a special spot where the holy chalice appears only to the worthy. The procession of this unique relic before the knights can be seen as the pinnacle of medieval ceremonial imagination. In the initial scene, a young man appears, carrying a silver basin that drips blood from its tip into the basin as if it would never fill. Subsequently, a young girl emerges, carrying candles with flames that burn but do not emit heat. Then a woman appears bearing the chalice. This figure radiates such extraordinary beauty and sanctity that she is barely perceptible to mortal eyes. The Holy Grail reflects differently for each person. This depends entirely on the observer's personal state and destiny. For some, the chalice appears as a simple wooden bowl, symbolizing Christ's humility. For others, it is a pure gold cup adorned with precious stones, reflecting celestial glory. Some envision it in a crystal or silver form, filled not with wine, but with a luminous liquid that nourishes the soul. The essential question that should be asked here focuses on souls rather than bodies. This question, expected to be posed to heal wounds and restore fertility to the barren land, is one of the fundamental mysteries of the tradition. Different versions feature various phrases. Whom does this serve? What ails your uncle? Or simply, what does this mean? But the common thread in all of them is the necessity of showing genuine concern for the suffering of others, rather than mere curiosity.
True wisdom manifests through compassion, transcending mere intellectual understanding. The failure to ask the essential question highlights the tragic gap between worldly success and profound insight in the Arthurian tales. The greatest knights in the world failed not due to lack of fearlessness or skill, rather, they fell short
because their worldly successes left them unprepared for these trials, which demanded virtues beyond the mundane. Gawain stands out as one of the first examples of these failed seekers. His strong attachment to the world and his worldly achievements constitute an obstacle to enlightenment. Since he relies on natural forces, his strength is dependent on external conditions. He gains or loses power with the rising and setting of the sun. He perceives what he sees within the mystical castle merely as an impressive spectacle, failing to grasp them as a meaningful revelation or a divine message that requires action. His nephew's failure reveals that even the most virtuous representatives of chivalric culture could not achieve the transformation necessary for the ultimate endeavor. His courtesy, generosity, and determination to protect the innocent make him an ideal hero figure. But these qualities become limiting when he encounters the greater mysteries beyond the world's boundaries. A perfect yet secular knight, when pursuing sublime truths, exposes the very fact of his humanity, his imperfection. Lancelot, at the moment he confronts the sacred relic, reveals the challenging relationship between worldly excellence and divine grace that shaped the literature. While his unique skill and devotion to duty present him as the pinnacle of chivalry, his internal conflicts of loyalty and his compromising nature prevent him from achieving the purity required for the ultimate struggle. In some narratives, a subsequently appearing knight seems only a step away from success. He witnesses the ceremony, feeling his soul ascending in contemplation. However, the memories of his earthly ties inevitably pull him back to mortal concerns. His failure is particularly affecting because it stems not from a lack of genuine potential, but from the intensity of his worldly attachments. His complete surrender to the sublime goals is therefore not possible.
Another failed seeker presents himself in the example of Percival, who initially seems pure and innocent. Though he lacks the power to resist supernatural difficulties, his advancement to the brink of the struggle emphasizes how difficult the endeavor is. This is also a process that prepares the audience for the ultimate satisfaction that comes from complete purity. Percival's journey marks his connection to his Welsh origins in the ancient Celtic narratives, linking him to quests for magical objects that bring abundance, life, and renewal. However, with the adaptation of these stories to Christian teachings, the simple rescue mission takes on an entirely new form, becoming a complex pilgrimage that tests the hero's moral and spiritual development. Percival is initially ignorant of courtly customs and social norms, yet this naivete turns into an advantage in situations where worldly knowledge and competence prove to be obstacles. His capacity for astonishment and the courage to ask simple questions reveal truths that the more equipped seekers overlook.
But even this innocence achieves only partial success. This clearly indicates that more than just a pure heart is needed to complete the quest entirely. Both human weakness and the power of grace find a reflection in the medieval narrative world, and the story acquires a universal dimension that questions these depths. The tradition mandates not only purity from sin, but also positive perfection, not merely good intention, but flawless execution, not just human excellence, but a virtue approaching the nature of the Almighty God. The inclusion of Galahad into this tradition presents a flawless example of worldly talent and grace blended with this challenge. Descended from Lancelot and combined with the figure of Elaine, this figure completes the requirements for a demanding perfection.
He inherits his father Lancelot's extraordinary fighting skill, but remains free from the weaknesses that brought about his father's shortcomings. His birth parallels Arthur's deceptive emergence, signaling that divine providence achieves goals unreachable by human effort alone, using human nature as its instrument. The Siege Perilous, which signifies Galahad's expected arrival at the Round Table, represents the integration of both worldly and spiritual meanings. This seat, which is fatal if occupied by an empty or unworthy person, has been vacant since the founding of the Fellowship. The inscription on it proclaims that it can be safely granted only to the perfect knight. When Galahad sits there unharmed, the members of the Round Table accept that their preparations for the ultimate journey are complete. The appearance of the sacred relic in the Great Hall of Camelot signals the beginning of the end for the secular fellowship. This unique object, though visible to all, cannot be fully grasped. It offers a satisfaction that overshadows and highlights the deficiency of worldly achievements. The knights, who dedicated their lives to worldly service, suddenly realize that the greatest journey of their lives has been a preparation for this final test. The collective setting out of the Round Table members for the Holy Quest carries the meaning of both sublimity and tragedy. These knights, shaped by worldly struggles and successes, leave behind everything they possess to reach a sacred ideal they struggle to comprehend. Their willingness to sacrifice certain worldly success for the uncertain goal of salvation points to the transformative power of this sublime calling over human priorities.
In this process, King Arthur's sorrow over the separation becomes the symbol of the fundamental, ongoing conflict between worldly attachment and spiritual elevation that shaped the entire tradition. As a sovereign, he needs the support of these knights to protect his country and maintain order. Yet, as a Christian leader, he cannot oppose the sublime sacred goals. His position, shaped by such contradictions, leaves him in an irresolvable dilemma. The individual adventures spanning the years of the quest offer clues to different levels of difficulty. Some are subjected to temptations that test their commitment to chastity, poverty, and obedience. Others face choices between competing values or the need to sacrifice personal desires for the sake of the sublime ideal. These obstacles challenge each knight's emotions and will on their developmental journey. symbolizing their struggle to attain maturity during the quest process. Still others must endure explicit failures and periods of abandonment that test their resolve. When the impression of withdrawn consent arises, the geographical expanse of these journeys reveals that medieval progress involves both an internal transformation and an external pilgrimage. The adventurers proceed simultaneously in the real physical world and in landscapes filled with allegorical meanings. They visit castles that symbolize different facets of the developmental process, encountering figures that represent various perfections and failures. Hermits and religious figures who guide them along the journey emerge as symbols of the contemplative tradition that complements the active knightly life. These holy individuals meet the needs of the knights on their quests with the insights they attain through prayer and repentance. Their counsel helps transform worldly experiences into deep understanding and lends meaning to the symbolic events encountered on the adventure.
The perfect knight's success surpasses even the most optimistic expectations of human excellence. Galahad's victory relies not on intense effort or self-sacrifice, but on the unique combination of innate talent and grace that makes a direct encounter with the ultimate mystery possible. This success justifies the chivalric project, while also clarifying its limitations. The healing of the wounded fisher and the revitalization of the barren land illuminate the cosmic importance of individual achievements. One person's flawless response to the calling reverses the consequences of ancient sins, bringing abundance back to a world where fertility had long been forgotten. In this context, the link between personal perfection and universal balance reflects the medieval idea of how individual souls influence the entire order of existence. The withdrawal of the sacred relic from the world signals the completion of one endeavor, while initiating a new phase of human development. After fully appearing to those with perfect vision, the object vanishes, leaving behind only a memory and a yearning. This situation implies that certain types of grace appear in human history only briefly, offering short glimpses of ultimate reality before returning to the dimension from which they came. The returning knights carry a burden of knowledge that transforms their community's understanding of the world. These travelers have witnessed the greatest peak human desires can reach, and simultaneously have understood their own limitations. Their experiences become both a source of inspiration and a means to comprehend how rare such awe-inspiring possibilities are. The knights reunited at the Round Table are now a fellowship long separated. They are no longer as self-assured as before. Empty seats recall companions who will not return, whether they lost their lives during their efforts or attained a sublime achievement beyond worldly concerns. The circular symbol representing equality now signifies loss rather than success, absence rather than presence. However, the weakening of the council serves purposes that the participants do not fully grasp. This process, which removed the highest-ranking members of the council,
sets the stage for the ultimate trial that holds the potential to transform worldly successes into a moral collapse and political catastrophe. When supernatural protection is lifted, the remaining knights become dependent solely on human resources. Just as human choices threaten to destroy everything that has been built over time, Arthur looks at his shrinking court with a mixture of pride and deep sorrow, fear mingled with triumph. His greatest achievement in bringing together the world's best knights culminates in their reaching a higher purpose, stripping them of worldly fame and glory. Yet, the positive outcomes of this endeavor both validate his reign and confirm that even his brightest achievements cannot be permanent. The Holy Grail, briefly illuminating the world before withdrawing, leaves behind a community that tasted perfection amidst an enduring context of imperfection. As the sacred relic returns to its mysterious realm, it takes with it a perfect knight who has transcended mortality. The ordinary people left behind must continue to struggle, guided only by memories. This great effort is in fact completed by its withdrawal. The apparent failure represents the point where the ideal reached its peak. Those who succeeded in capturing the most precious treasure realize that the acquisition took it from their grasp. Those who failed must understand that the greatest adventure of human history was the endeavor itself. They find true meaning not in possession, but in transformation, not in arrival, but in the journey, not in certainty, but in faith. Although the barren land is fertile again, the mystical castle is now lost behind the mists. The wounded fisher is healing, but the perfect knight has ascended to a place unreachable by mortal eyes. The ultimate endeavor succeeds. It leaves the world as it is, creating a unique transformation. Salvation is offered only to the worthy, clearly revealing how rare this capacity is.
In the increasing gloom of the approaching twilight, the weakening fellowship prepares to face challenges that will test whether what is valuable can endure when protection is gone. Human excellence must now fight the consequences of human frailty on its own. When the figures of otherworldly successes are gone, when Christendom's most sacred treasure vanishes from the mortal world, and when the most powerful warriors either leave life or ascend beyond worldly boundaries, the unending circular fellowship leaves a sorrowful trace like a broken crown. The empty seats continue to bear witness to moments of glory that can never be brought back. The farewell of the pure hero and the Holy Grail has left behind a community diminished not only in number, but also in purpose. After seeing a vision of perfection beyond the material world, the members turn their search for meaning back to worldly service. This lack of authority and purpose sets the stage for the figure who represents the contradictions that always threatened Arthur's world. Regardless of which narrative you choose to believe, whether he is the bastard prince, the nephew, or the son, he emerges silently from the shadows,
waiting for a moment of weakness to be exploited. The blood feud of an ancient wound is now finally coming to an end. Now the time has come. The questioning of this claimant to the throne's legitimacy reveals the evolution of moral complexity within the Arthurian legend. Starting from Geoffrey of Monmouth's historical account, his depiction as merely the sovereign's nephew makes his betrayal terrible, yet still provides the ruler with a shield of partial innocence. However, subsequent writers choose to delve deeper into this tragedy. They transform him into the illegitimate child born from the ruler's unwitting union with his own sister, another sin committed in ignorance, but one whose destruction is inevitable. A sin that stands in contrast to the ideals represented by the circular council.
The transformation from nephew to illegitimate son is a shift that reflects medieval thought on how individual moral failures can expand over time, corrupting social institutions and overturning seemingly unshakable achievements. The child born in sin becomes the instrument that demands the ultimate price of sin, proving that no earthly paradise can entirely escape the consequences of human frailty. Whether nephew or son, this figure always symbolizes or instigates an internal corruption more dangerous than external enemies. He grew up in the center of Camelot. He learned its traditions. He was imbued with its ideals. He even entered its most secret councils. He knows every weakness, grasping every vulnerability with an unerring precision. He can calculate step by step how to react to moves that would set the enemy free, and possesses advantages that no external invader could ever attain. Resentment flourishes in the darkness, fueled by the deep roots of years of slights and intentionally felt neglect. In the court, under the light of others who spectacularly celebrated their successes, he is deprived of the right he believes is his own. As a member of the royal family, he witnesses the fellowship's growing corruption amidst divided loyalties and unattainable ideals. He is forced to watch others assume the honor and responsibilities that should have been his by birth. His scorn for the values the fellowship holds, which he perceives as offering less than promised, grows. The diminished council members offer him opportunities that were not possible during the glittering golden age of the circular fellowship. Yet, as Galahad has ascended, the legendary lake champion is exiled. Many seats remain empty, and those who survived struggle in disappointment and the exhaustion of years. The moral authority and common purpose that once proved them invincible are now lost.
Certainty is replaced by doubt, enthusiasm by exhaustion. The powerful ideals that once led to supernatural successes are now gradually poisoned by a cynical atmosphere. In this environment, provocation becomes a tool through which claimants to the throne expose and exploit the last fragments of power in the court. The situation resembles the fading away of the Roman eagles, which withdrew from Britain in 410. Like a dream at dawn, their bronze wings displayed one last gleam under the northern sun,
before disappearing on our horizon. They leave behind a land caught between two worlds, a home neither belonging to the Roman Empire nor fully English, a realm lingering in that dangerous twilight where legends are born. This region, rising from the ashes of empires, is symbolized by the Christian mosaics gathering dust in its decaying stone villas. Weeds now grow through the marble floors that once adorned these villas. The traces of feasts that once echoed with Latin poetry fade in the shadow of these wild grasses. Similar scenes of desolation across Britain tell the story of the collapse of a civilization that stood for nearly 4 centuries. Without the Roman legions to protect the borders and the imperial bureaucracy to maintain order, the island fragments into small kingdoms that seem to remember Roman law but lack its power. Yet, Tintagel Castle on the wild shores of Cornwall is an exception to this story. Here, pottery brought from the Mediterranean is intertwined with local Celtic artifacts. This castle, defying the harsh winds, continues to control trade routes stretching from Ireland to Constantinople. Cadbury Castle, the great hill fort in Somerset, bears traces of extensive 5th century fortifications. It is sensed here that someone with great resources and foresight prepared for a war, gathering earth and stone. As the Saxon tide advanced, it swept in waves from the shores of Kent and Sussex toward the island's interior relentlessly. Those arriving were not mere raiders. They were a community of people, with their women, children, livestock, and household gods, eager to establish permanent homes in Britain. They had crossed the North Sea to make British soil their eternal home. They brought with them strange customs, harsh languages, and a warrior culture that measured honor by battle scars and valued loyalty above life itself. The works of the English monk Gildas, penned in the 6th century, carry the emotions of a person witnessing the Saxon advance, recounting his ruined world with sorrowful expressions. The fire of vengeance spread from sea to sea, licking the western ocean like a red, savage tongue. In Gildas's words, there is a terrifying depiction of the Saxons' Germanic axes shattering Romano-British skulls and destroying libraries where the verses of Virgil had echoed for generations. Yet, the monk also recounts moments of victory, when the Britons rallied and drove back the invaders. Among these victories, the leadership of Ambrosius Aurelianus is emphasized, a figure who rallied the scattered kingdoms and reignited hope when on the brink of defeat. He serves as a bridge between Roman order and Celtic heroism, and is later featured in myths as Arthur's forerunner or kinsman. In 516, an anonymous writer, using brief phrases, records that Arthur fought at the Battle of Badon, bearing the cross of Christ on his shoulders for 3 days and 3 nights. This record is one of the oldest written evidences of Arthur's existence and heralds the victory of the Britons. The details of the battle suggest a long siege or connected skirmishes. Such arduous struggles precisely reflect the character of that era. In the work titled Historia Britonum, the Welsh monk Nennius expands the narratives concerning Arthur.
He details the 12 battles Arthur participated in against the Saxons, and especially the bloody victory at Mount Badon, where he is believed to have slain 960 men. Although the numbers appear exaggerated, the core story carries realism. The victory of an important commander who halted the Saxon advance and provided Britain with a generation of respite.
These acts of heroism led to narratives that would become the cornerstones of medieval European mythology. 3 historical figures may have played a part in this beginning. Lucius Artorius Castus, the Roman cavalry commander who led campaigns in Scotland in the 2nd century. His name and military successes resonated among the peoples, and he is the distant herald of the armored cavalry that shaped the Arthurian legend. Furthermore, the role of Rhianus Thomas, referred to in continental sources as the High King, is notable. In the 5th century, he led the British army to Gaul to assist the Romans against barbarian invasions, and subsequently vanished into obscurity in the forests of Burgundy. His name, title of kingship, and mysterious fate echo in the historical shadows behind the legends. The hero of the later legend presents interesting parallels with a king figure who conquered foreign lands before meeting disaster away from home. However, in ancient sources, the person who most closely fits this historical reality is identified as Ambrosius Aurelianus. Gildas describes him as a Roman leader who organized Britain's resistance, known for his parents wearing purple, which evoked the concept of the empire. In the aftermath of a devastating defeat, some sources view Ambrosius as the predecessor of the future king, while others suggest he was a type of commander or lieutenant. However, all agree that the victory at Mount Badon between 490 and 516 AD was the climax of the British resistance spearheaded by Ambrosius. This battle was a critical turning point that changed the course of European history. The Saxons, steeped in their perception of destiny, that their people would conquer the entirety of Britain, were intoxicated by decades of easy victories. However, this advance, which failed to heed the collapse of other Roman provinces, turned into a trap that would accelerate their decline for 2 generations. Liddington Hill in Wiltshire is proposed as the battleground. Its strategic position, controlling the Thames Valley, was notable.
Alternatively, the ancient earthworks in Dorset also come to mind. These structures provided defenders with an advantage while channeling attackers into killing zones. For the first time since the Saxon invasions began, the location of the battle was less decisive than its outcome. The British resistance secured a definitive victory against their seemingly invincible enemies. Contemporary records state that the battle lasted 3 days, and that this included either a long siege or multiple interconnected skirmishes. Archaeological findings from the period indicate that the Romano-British forces successfully adapted their tactics to the changing conditions. Moving away from the rigid infantry formations of classical Rome, emphasis was placed on flexible cavalry units
supported by local militias. Heavy cavalry units equipped with long spears could achieve overwhelming superiority in battles, provided they had leaders capable of commanding such complex operations. The supreme war chief, Dux Bellorum, one of these leaders, stood out as a commander who derived his authority from military skill rather than hereditary lineage, a concept understood in medieval terms as a king. Around him were Romano-British cavalry, Celtic warriors, Christian soldiers who believed they were fighting a holy war against pagan invaders, and even foreign mercenaries seeking fame. The victory at Badon produced significant consequences, not just militarily, but politically as well. The Saxons not only retreated from the forward lines of advance they had occupied, they also abandoned any further ambition for conquest, instead consolidating their hold on the territories they already controlled. For nearly 50 years following the Battle of Badon, historical records suggest that a period of large-scale peace prevailed between the Britons and the Saxons.
This artifact of the Arthurian age symbolizes one of the last successful defenses of Romano-British civilization against barbarian invasions, and at the same time brought a crucial period for Christian culture to take root. Long before Christian scribes recorded the triumphs against the Saxon pagans, Celtic bards in the misty world of the Welsh tradition had woven stories around heroes who transcended the limits of ordinary humanity. The legendary war chief emerges less as a historical king and more as a supernatural hero whose adventures take him to the farthest reaches of the world. The story of Culwich and Olwen, preserved in medieval Welsh manuscripts but rooted in older oral traditions, tells of a figure who commands not only warriors but also giants, shapeshifters, and magical creatures. In the hero's court reside men who can hear voices from 80 kilometers away, dry up the seas, and whose stature reaches the clouds. This tale is reminiscent of the Irish Finn McCool, depicting a fantastical hero specific to Celtic folklore. Yet, even in such fantastical adventures, certain fundamental elements endure that will resonate in later versions of the legend. The Hall of Heroes embraces all worthy warriors, regardless of birth or background. Justice protects the weak and the innocent. Generosity transforms the host into a revered patron in the Celtic world. Ideals like hospitality, justice, and generosity form the moral foundations that would pave the way for the concept of chivalry in medieval romance. Nevertheless, the Welsh hero also carries older and somber connotations that the Christian tradition would struggle to suppress. On an expedition to the otherworldly castle of Anwan to seize a magical cauldron that would never empty, he loses most of his companions. These losses set the stage for the quest for the Holy Grail,
while also foreshadowing the tragic conclusions of the legends. This figure battles giants and creatures symbolizing primeval chaos, beings older than human history. He possesses a sword called Collectfuk, the precursor to Excalibur, which is destined to become legendary. The Celtic tradition carries a legacy that extends far beyond the confines of Britain. Breton storytellers, refugees fleeing the Saxon invasions, carried the tales of the great king to continental Europe. Here they merged with French romance, triggering a transformation in European literature.
Arthur's name is highly revered across a wide geography, from Ireland to Jerusalem, where he is known as Arthur le Grand. Despite being tightly bound to Roman law and Christian doctrine, the Druidic tradition shapes the Celtic perception of heroism. The concept of the sacred king, the mystical idea that links the land's fertility to the ruler's spiritual health, infuses the Arthurian legend with mystic elements that no Christian interpretation could entirely erase. The barren lands symbolizing royal failure, and the magical sword that chooses the rightful ruler originate from pre-Christian Celtic beliefs regarding the mystical bond between the king and the kingdom. Celtic mythology, especially in the Irish and Welsh traditions, shaped the understanding of the hero's tragic destiny. The greatest warriors are doomed to destruction from the moment of their birth. This very perfection brings about their end. Cuchulain's battle fury makes him invincible, but also transforms him into a figure outside the human community. Fionn mac Cumhall's excellence as the perfect leader of a warrior band carries the seeds of its own collapse. The Arthurian legend inherits this tragic cycle, transforming a great victory into an eternal loop of ascent, glory, and ultimately inevitable decline. The transition from history to legend happens almost instantaneously. Welsh bards, accustomed to celebrating their patrons' achievements with verses that stretch reality and exalt the English war chief, found a subject worthy of their extravagant praise. Arthur's victory against the Saxons was viewed as a triumph over all enemies threatening English freedom. The cavalry charge at Badon was transformed into a supernatural assault, slaying hundreds effortlessly. Arthur's war leadership became the symbol of a perfect kingdom, uniting the fragmented British principalities under a single crown. The geographical distribution of early Arthurian settlements offers historical connections stretching from Cornwall to Scotland. While ancient monuments in the Middle Ages were generally associated with Arthur's era, the most intensive remnants are found in the western regions, where the Britons resisted the Saxon advance for the longest time. Places like Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, Caerleon in Wales, and Tintagel in Cornwall still reflect the stories of ancient British war leaders
who possessed enough resources and loyalty to defy foreign conquests. These cultural legacies, supported by archaeological studies, offer fascinating clues about their origins. In the historical context of late 5th century Britain, Tintagel harbors findings that prove it was a high-status settlement of the time. Mediterranean pottery, wine amphorae, and luxury goods show that this isolated Cornish castle maintained trade connections extending across Europe, and the leader ruling here commanded the international relations a successful commander would possess. Cadbury Castle, according to local traditions, is positioned in Camelot as the home of future kings. Undergoing a serious fortification process toward the end of the 5th century, the castle has hosted this legendary connection since the 16th century. Extensive construction work, including the completion of new ramparts, gates, and interior buildings, indicates the presence of a leader who commanded significant manpower and resources during this period. Carbon dating associates this structure with the period of the British resistance leadership against the Saxon expansion. With the writings of Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, this historical figure was transformed from a war leader into a folk hero. The foundational elements of the legend, shaped over time, became ready material for literature. The story of this figure, hailed as the savior of a civilization, comes to life within the oral tradition that carries him beyond mortality. Both his competence in the martial arts and the cultural understanding that valued moral superiority transform him into a legend. In this atmosphere, the mists of Avalon gather around a historical war leader, obscuring his human face but revealing the immortal symbol within.
Within these mystical mists, writers and thinkers, dreaming for 12 centuries, questioned the power of leadership, the bonds of friendship, and the necessity of sacrifice. This figure, conceived as the king of the future and the past, awaits in a deep sleep before the literary awakening that will ensure his immortality. It is around 1136 that the writings initiating this legendary transformation come to life in Oxford. Geoffrey of Monmouth, a Welsh cleric, dips his quill into ink and writes one of the most influential legends that resonates throughout European literature. His work, Historia Regum Britannia, the history of the kings of Britain, transforms a war leader from the dusty pages of history into an imaginary but glorious ruler. Geoffrey's creative mind presents this fantastical past to a world shaken by conquest to show how a kingdom could achieve greatness through the fusion of God's power and human nobility. Writing 66 years after the Normans seized England, the historian recognized the Norman conquerors' need for an ancient heritage that could legitimize their rule. The French-speaking Norman aristocracy, which supplanted Anglo-Saxon England at Hastings, brought stone castles and a brutal administrative approach. But the one thing they needed most was lacking: royal legitimacy based on the sanctity of the land. In response to this demand for a past that would justify Norman rule,
Geoffrey constructs a history so magnificent that the legacy of Charlemagne pales in comparison. If the history of this island is to be proven eternally destined for greatness, then a story of a king who conquered Rome is required, and that story is now ready. If people are seeking a model of a Christian monarchy that blends military might with spiritual authority, a Welsh monk resurrects the war leader of Mount Badon and declares him the emperor of half the world. History begins with a brand new legend, one that traces the British royal line not to known commanders, but to the survivors of Troy.
Brutus, the great-grandson of Aeneas, leads his group of refugees across the Mediterranean and Gaul to the White Cliffs of Britain. He then founds New Troy, which will later be known as London. This Trojan connection elevates the British kingdom to a legendary status directly commensurate with Rome's imperial claims. This powerful fictional genealogy, challenging the Normans' 1,000-year fabricated history, always progresses toward the summit it is destined to reach, the reign of the great King of Britain. However, this epic ruler is far deeper than a superficial hero figure fighting the Saxon raiders with Christian symbols. A product of the Welsh imagination, this figure transcends the borders of post-Roman Britain, achieving successes that overshadow those of Alexander or Caesar to become a world-conquering emperor. This transformation is rooted in an extraordinary starting point, the supernatural circumstances that led to his birth. While previous sources offer no information regarding his origins, an Oxford cleric defines this hero as a divine chosen one and adds supernatural elements to his story. Uther Pendragon, King of Britain, is consumed by a passionate love for a Duchess of Cornwall with complete purity. This intense desire threatens to plunge the realm into civil war until the wizard Merlin offers a solution that elevates the love to the level of legend. Through a magical disguise, love prevails. With Merlin's arts, Uther assumes the guise of the Duke of Cornwall on a stormy night at Tintagel Castle. While the real Duke is away on the battlefield, Uther enters the castle and wins the woman he loves with the help of magic. The event occurs with perfect timing. The magic works flawlessly, and the outcome is inevitable. A child born into the world through supernatural intervention is destined to be the greatest king in British history, a being shaped by passions and guided by prophecies. This miraculous conception removes the future ruler from ordinary royal status, placing him on the same line as Jesus of Nazareth and mythological heroes. He enters the world as the product of divine intervention, beyond classical biological laws.
His origins represent the blending of an earthly lineage with supernatural powers.
even the circumstances of his birth signal that this child will surpass the limitations of ordinary rulers, achieving a great power that goes beyond mere human ambition and reflects a divine will. However, the cleric's intelligence lies not only in creating extraordinary origins, but also in his skill in fitting them into a coherent political and spiritual framework suitable for the needs of the 12th century monarchy. This mystical portrayal serves multiple purposes. It explains the unique abilities the future king will exhibit, justifies the absolute loyalty demanded from his subjects, and provides a religious legitimacy for his ultimate victories. The metaphor of divine intervention in kingship grants the royal authority a sacred legitimacy and becomes one of the fundamental building blocks of this story. After Uther's early death, the young prince is left orphaned and defenseless. Thanks to Merlin's wisdom, he is kept hidden until the time of his revelation. This period of concealment carries both dramatic and political functions within the narrative context. Dramatically, it forms the basis for the sword in the stone scene, which proves the youth's legal right to the throne. On the political level, it demonstrates that true kingship transcends mere birth and upbringing, manifesting itself through divine signs that cannot be replicated by human authorities. The sword stuck in the stone scene appears as a beacon of hope for a kingdom in its most desperate hour, a kingdom whose heirs are exhausted. It emerges precisely when the realm is sinking into chaos, with ambitious nobles vying for regional dominance. Upon Merlin's advice, the Archbishop of Canterbury summons warriors from all corners of Britain to London for a grand tournament. According to the accounts, a sword appears on a stone, placed before the church with an inscription promising the crown to the person who can draw it. Everyone attempts this miracle, from the most powerful counts to the lowest ranked knights in all corners of Britain, but the sword remains unmoved. This clearly shows that the source of royal legitimacy is not human physical strength, but divine will. Finally, the unnamed youth approaches the sword. He does so not with arrogant desire, but with a pure sense of service.
His stepbrother, Kay, participates in his tournament, his only wish being to replace a forgotten sword with a useful spare. The sword slides easily from the stone, moving like a well-oiled scabbard, and at that very moment reveals the true nature of the Christian kingdom. This kingdom derived its power not from violence or cunning, but from spiritual values bestowed by God, no matter how blind humanity might be. This extraordinary selection illuminated the principles that would guide the king throughout his entire reign. The new king ascended to sovereignty not through conquest or direct inheritance, but through a divine mandate symbolized by a supernatural sign. His authority originated neither from the support of nobles nor the cheers of armies. Its source was the divine will, expressed through a miraculous intervention. Such a ruler could demand absolute loyalty and obedience, as his commands carried a sacred sanction. However, since this authority rested solely on his spiritual merit, it had to be wielded in accordance with divine laws. The coronation ceremony became a symbol that embodied Geoffrey's vision of the perfect Christian monarchy. The young ruler accepted not only the crown and scepter of material authority, but also the spiritual blessing that transformed him from an outstanding warrior into a sacred sovereign. This ceremony created a harmonious model of a royal oath, blending Roman imperial symbols, Christian religious rituals, and Celtic kingship traditions, symbolizing how the divine will guides human institutions. Yet, as the Welsh writer was aware, medieval audiences expected not only spiritual perfection, but also practical competencies from their ideal rulers. The people wanted a strong king to possess military skills, political wisdom, and the ability to defend against both internal and external threats. The new king had to prove this competence by acting in a manner worthy of the miraculous nature of his election. The reflection of divine support had to be evident not only in defeating enemies, but also in managing the unruly nobles.
The initial military campaigns perfectly met these expectations. Saxon raiders plundering the eastern regions quickly understood that the new king was operating with a supernatural force. Cavalry attacks scattered the enemy forces like leaves tossed by an autumn wind. His strategic brilliance predicted the enemy's moves with a near prophetic accuracy. Inspiring his followers with personal courage, the king raised the morale of his people with acts of heroism that turned seemingly hopeless battles into overwhelming victories. However, the historian's vision went beyond mere defensive wars aimed at protecting the borders. As a true leader, the king strived to preserve Romano-British civilization while also asserting leadership over other territories. This ruler, known as the King of Literature, embarked on conquest campaigns that carried English arms to all corners of the world. Ireland came under the control of his forces within a few months. Then, Scotland submitted after brilliant victories that revealed both his tactical genius and his merciful approach toward defeated enemies. These preliminary conquests established an order that shaped the destiny of the kingdom. His military victories were guided by moral ideals rather than mere territorial ambition. Every success extended Christian civilization into regions previously dominated by pagan barbarism. Every conquest represented the introduction of justice to lands ruled by tyranny and chaos. Each new territory added to the growing empire symbolized the triumph of divine order over chaotic evil. This expansion, extending beyond the British Isles, transformed a local historical narrative into an imperial epic. The kings of Norway, who terrorized the northern seas, surrendered their fleets and swore allegiance.
Danish warriors who had plundered Christian monasteries for generations converted to the faith and offered their weapons in service to the Kingdom of Britain. Even the proud French lords, who traced their lineage back to Charlemagne, were forced to accept the supremacy of this British emperor, whose achievements surpassed those of any ruler on the continent. The depictions of the Gallic campaigns by the Oxford academics demonstrate this ruler's superior grasp of contemporary European politics and historical writing. Writing during a period when Norman kings ruled both England and significant territories in France, the existing political arrangements were presented as a revival of ancient splendor rather than a recent victory.
creating a mythological foundation for an empire stretching across the English Channel. The literary king's successes in Gaul provided a historical legitimacy for the Normans' claims over French territories, while increasing Britain's prestige against its continental rivals. The culmination of these conquests is linked to the historical British war leaders' challenge to the very places that sought to preserve the last traces of Roman civilization. Geoffrey's fictional empire carried the war into the heart of the Roman Empire, which once ruled the world, establishing a reversed power dynamic. Britain, once a recipient of Roman law, now imposed its own authority on the Eternal City. The barbarian island, once viewed as being outside the boundaries of civilization, now emerged as the cradle of a new imperial order that would surpass all past achievements. This confrontation with Rome serves multiple symbols, marking a striking point in the overall narrative structure. It is a situation that tests the worth of the British king at the highest level, pitting him against the figure who represents the pinnacle of military and political power in medieval thought. Politically, it implies that a Christian monarchy under divine guidance can achieve victories that overshadow past empires. Spiritually, it supports the thesis that Britain has inherited Rome's imperial legacy, becoming the world's new center of civilization through divine power. The figure of the emperor marching on Rome is vastly different from the war leader who once struggled to defend Britain against Saxon invasions.
This work transcends historical boundaries, symbolizing the potential of a kingdom guided by divine will and operating according to Christian principles. The conquests are presented not merely as a display of crude power, but as the triumph of universal values for the benefit of all humanity. Yet, the historian, while elevating his hero to an unreachable peak of success, also begins to lay the foundation for the tragedy that will shake this zenith. The perfection brought by this success paradoxically brings with it the elements that prepare its downfall. The deep devotion that made the kingdom's glorious triumphs possible also breeds the arrogance and ambition that triggered division. The magical elements representing divine aid in the king's rise eventually manifest as a supernatural disaster. As collapse approaches, Merlin, who set the stage for Uther's deceptive influence and guided the king's initial victories, this time begins to withdraw his hand from human affairs. Prophecies, instead of promising success as before, now reflect the shadows of the impending catastrophe. The supernatural powers that lifted a mortal to unprecedented glory also mobilize to complete this ascent with a tragic end. The inclusion of Mordred in the narrative assumes a critical role precisely at this point. He represents the human dimension of the tragic reversal. Although Mordred's origin is described in the narrative as a nephew rather than an illegitimate son, his function is clear: to embody the betrayal that can collapse even the most perfect formations. His presence at court reminds readers that humanity carries the seeds of its own destruction within its nature. A kingdom blessed with divine legitimacy cannot permanently overcome its worldly flaws.
As the work progresses to its climax, it shows how a Welsh cleric profoundly shaped the Arthurian legend. The image of a leader who once achieved only a limited victory against Saxon invaders has been transformed into a legendary ruler who conquered 3 continents. The Dux Bellorum, who defended the remnants of Romano-British civilization, gains the identity of a world conqueror whose successes overshadow those of Alexander, Caesar, and Charlemagne. This literary recreation will endure longer than historical artifacts. The image of the perfect king, defined through Christian ideals, will inspire romances for centuries and shape Europe's aristocratic values, forming the foundation of the chivalric tradition.
The model of monarchy, based on divine will and governed by spiritual principles, becomes the ideal for kings who genuinely attempt to implement it. And history ends where it began, but concealing the promise of return within. The wounded emperor sets off for Avalon. Neither dead nor alive, the king waits there until Britain needs him once more. This uncertain conclusion allows Geoffrey's work to continue developing, guiding new generations of storytellers to understand the effects and origins of a perfect kingdom. This story continues to be a source of inspiration, questioning the tragic destiny that awaits all human achievements, no matter how noble or sacred. The Welsh cleric lays down his pen in peace, perhaps because he gave life to a king who meets the needs of the era, even if he never truly existed. As the ink dries on the parchment, the legend carries Arthur's story far beyond the shores of Britain. Scribes throughout Europe copy this epic, carrying the vision of the once and future king to the farthest corners of the Christian world. Thus, the creation of a king is complete. From this point on, the foundations of a legend are laid, one that will survive even the kingdoms that created it. Before the ink fully dries, new narrators take up this story, transforming it into something more revolutionary. The rise of a Christian king, now ruling not through conquests, but through ideals like fellowship, justice, and sacred alliance, begins, accompanied by the lyrical bards and poets of the 12th century European courts. This is his true destiny, to meet the people with a new form of governance that ignites a 1,000-year yearning for leadership, rather than being an emperor who conquers nations. Around 1155, Maistre Was, writing in the Norman court, undertakes an important task that will leave a lasting mark on European literature. King Henry II, the ruler of an empire, requests the translation of a Latin chronicle into French verse, a work that both warriors can internalize and one that can impress the court with the subtleties of elegance. However, Was's efforts are not limited to a mere translation. This work reshapes the vision surrounding the ideal monarchy by exploring the courtly aesthetic of the period and giving it new meanings.
This work, Roman de Brut, draws attention with innovative ideas that transcend ordinary conquests. The powerful inclusion of the Round Table as a symbol allows the great kings previously proclaimed to become guides not only for their subjects, but also for leaders distinguished by their principles. The Norman poet designs a radical institution that emphasizes the concepts of warrior equality and sacred brotherhood, the Round Table. Here, no seat is superior to another. The champions at the Round Table
gather with a commitment based on ideals that transcend ordinary feudal bonds. This bond of fellowship ceases to be a mere fantasy, representing deeper ideals embodied by the poet's vision. The legendary tale thus becomes a powerful reflection of the idea of a new world order. Focusing on the fundamental tensions of feudal society, this text addresses the elements that threaten the internal dynamics of the courts, where such stories find their most enthusiastic audience. Medieval nobles constantly face issues like precedence, honor, and legitimate authority. Who is closest to the king? Which warrior deserves the most dangerous task? How can competing claims like birthright nobility be balanced with wealth and achievement? It is at this point that the circular table offers an elegant solution, a vision of fellowship, where worth is superior to wealth and virtue is more valuable than bloodline. In a place where merit is the sole measure of status, extravagance gives way to a different understanding. Precisely during a period when European courts were seeking new possibilities for aristocratic behavior, the old hardened warriors gave way to new representatives of their generations. The descendants of the warriors who carried William to victory across the Channel are now individuals educated in Latin letters, shaped by refinement and courtly manners, and possessing nuanced ideas about honor, love, and spiritual values.
This new generation of heroes needs different narratives and modes of behavior that emphasize that nobility is not just about military skill. The Arthurian legend also adapts to this change. Texts written around the 1200s by laymen continue the evolution of the legend, crossing its boundaries into Middle English. Addressing an audience speaking the language of the conquered rather than the conquerors, English priests enrich the story with their own interpretations. They highlight mystical and supernatural elements, blending them with landscapes familiar to the readers. Thus, the circular table moves beyond being a mere piece of court furniture, transforming into a sacred space where divine will is realized through human fellowship. This version, written in a language accessible to broader audiences, shows how the Arthurian age was reshaped within various cultural frameworks. While Norman readers debated complex matters of court protocol, English readers embraced themes like justice, the protection of the weak, and resistance to tyranny. This fellowship emerges as an idealized symbol of hope. Whether against foreign invaders, corrupt authorities, or marauding nobles, the story transforms into a symbol where ordinary people dream of leaders who can resist oppression. These early adaptations formed the building blocks of Arthurian literature for centuries, enabling the legend to become one where every generation can find elements that respond to its own anxieties, fears, and ideals. The core story remains constant. A great king establishes a fellowship of warriors dedicated to protecting the innocent and upholding justice. However, the details of the narrative are shaped to reflect the changing social conditions, evolving religious concepts, and new political realities of the era. The court that emerges from these early romances represents a groundbreaking vision of an order where the monarchy is governed by Christian ethics and justice is prioritized over individual interests. This offers a model of a kingdom that evolves from Germanic leadership to ideals of divine sovereignty. The ruler's primary duty is no longer to enrich his subjects with spoils of war, but to create environments where virtue can take root and the vulnerable can be protected. Camelot is not merely a royal residence,
it gains a much profounder meaning.
Camelot transforms into the symbol of ideal governance, embodied in stone and wood. It rises on lush meadows along a flowing river, its white towers gleaming like a reflection of the new Jerusalem on earth. Thick ramparts enclose organized courtyards where combat skills are tested, while gardens provide settings for contemplation and pleasant courtly conversations, setting the stage for tournaments. The great hall commands attention with its awe-inspiring magnificence. Its vaulted ceiling is adorned with depictions of saints and angels, while banners displaying the coats of arms of champions from all corners of the world hang throughout the hall. But the central focal point, in the very heart of the hall, is the round table, the ultimate symbol of the unity it emphasizes. Carved from a single enormous oak tree, the table presents an impressive elegance with golden-hued grain patterns in its wood. Each chair at the table is personalized with the name of the warrior who will sit there, inlaid in silver, yet 13 of them still await the heroes destined to fill them. These empty seats represent an open invitation to any champion who can attain the honor and responsibility required by the brotherhood. Nevertheless, the true glory of the court lies not in its structural or material splendor, but in the depth of the spirit of fellowship residing in its soul. Warriors who previously dedicated their lives solely to the pursuit of individual fame and glory now discovered the joy of belonging within this unity, moving away from personal ambitions. Even seasoned veterans who emerged victorious from numerous conflicts find a new purpose, guided by goals that serve divine justice rather than mere success. Young warriors learn that true honor is gained not by conquering the enemy, but by protecting the vulnerable. This cultural transformation mirrors the broader changes emerging in 12th century Europe. The Church's Peace of God movement aims to limit the destructiveness of conflict and protect civilians, while the concept of courtly love introduces a new understanding of masculine conduct rooted in service, courtesy, and spiritual purity. Thus, the Arthurian court becomes a laboratory where these changes are tested.
This is an environment where new ideas are explored and proven. It is an imaginary platform where writers can experiment with radical thoughts about the future shape of aristocratic society. The circular fellowship establishes rules of conduct that can influence the actual attitudes of the warrior class. For generations, these rules encompass not only fighting abilities, but also complex responsibilities such as the protection of women and children, the defense of church property, and aiding the poor. They also include a commitment to the principle of honesty. Honesty is central to these values, even if the cost is dangerous or heavy. Such obligations require not only physical courage, but also a moral strength that transforms the warriors into beings akin to secular saints. Every new member, before taking his place at the table, swears a sacred oath to fear God, protect the church, serve his Lord with courage and faith. These vows include responsibilities to safeguard the weak and defenseless, aid widows and orphans, refrain from aimless attacks, live an honorable life, disdain material rewards, and defend the welfare of the populace. They also entail allegiance to authority, protecting the honor of their warrior brothers,
abstaining from injustice and deceit, remaining loyal, and the imperative to always speak the truth. These oaths, blessed by priests and sworn before holy relics, create bonds stronger than blood and gold. The champions gathered around the circular table symbolize the various facets of the chivalric ideal, and each embodies the virtues considered an integral part of Christian knighthood by medieval society. Gawain, the king's nephew, offers the ideal example of courtesy and the protection of innocence. Gawain's strength waxes and wanes in harmony with the rhythm of the sun. This shows that he fulfills his role as a champion of divine light against the forces of darkness with great reverence. His adventures constantly revolve around his efforts to defend that which is worthy of defense.